to now has actually been relatively restrained. We thought they might respond after the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran during the inauguration of the new president. We thought they might respond after the attacks on Hezbollah. So they've been relatively restrained. Benjamin Netanyahu gave a warning direct to the Iranian people that you are within our range. But the Iranians have decided to open this extra front. And the question now, I suppose, is what will be the Israeli response, which I suppose will depend on the damage that is done or not done, how many of these missiles, if any, get through, and what sort of damage they inflict. I fear if they hit anything significant, we could expect an Israeli response.
Indeed, that is the concern now, the fear that everyone has had, a confrontation between Iran and Israel. We obviously saw a much more choreographed attack in April, which Israel, the United States, their allies and partners were able to prevent from doing any real damage. It's difficult to know at this stage what sort of damage this has done. The IDF has been reporting that to their citizens that the sounds that they're hearing are of interceptions, but they're also of projectiles. So it could possibly be, and this is obviously speculation at this stage, that what we're seeing is potential missiles that could have gotten through. We were just speaking to our correspondent on the ground who said he's lived in that country for several years. He's never seen anything like this.
Well, there hasn't been. The previous attack was, as you say, choreographed. It was signaled in advance. The Americans, the British, even the Jordanians and forces in Iraq were on hand to intercept these missiles. That was a kind of a display. This seems much more serious. I would be surprised if any Arab countries were involved in defending Israel this time around. I'd be surprised if Jordan got involved. We're yet to hear where any British planes were involved in intercepting missiles, or whether the Americans were or not. So we have to wait for the news. I hope British planes were not involved. I hope we don't get dragged into a wider war. I think Israel will respond in some form or other. The extent of that response will depend on the damage.
But do you think that ultimately, given the position of the UK government, the US government, in terms of standing by Israel, should it be attacked, and if these missiles have indeed, done any kind of damage, certainly if we see any civilian casualties, Israel will respond? That will not only turn into a wider regional conflict, but are you concerned that it will bring in allies like the United States and the UK?
Well, I think it'll certainly bring in the United States. The question is, would it bring in the UK? The UK has a balancing act here. We want to ensure Israel's security, but not at the expense of the Palestinians or at the expense of the Lebanese. So there's a balance to be struck by saying Israel has a right to defend itself and help Israel do so. But they also have to take into account that Israel, it's a very right-wing extreme government in Israel. I heard it described at a conference today as proto-fascist. And I don't think that's too extreme. They've got a very extreme right-wing government that has actually escalated the conflict in Lebanon and bear a considerable amount of responsibility for this sort of escalation. If you think what has led up to this, attacks in Tehran, attacks in Syria, attacks against Iranian allies in Lebanon. So they bear quite a bit of responsibility when their allies, Britain and the United States, has been telling them to reduce the tension, try to cut a ceasefire in Lebanon, a ceasefire in Gaza.
But there has been an incredibly lackluster response from the United States. I mean, they seem to be putting their hands up and saying, well, we can't quite put any pressure on any side, but we do call for a ceasefire and we do express concern. But clearly that isn't good enough, given the images that we are seeing now this evening. Nearly 200 missiles launched into Israel from Iran.
That is.
Israeli forces conducting a ground offensive inside Lebanon. We're seeing hundreds of civilians killed in this country, the war in Gaza continuing, and yet it appears the United States is stepping back and saying all we can do at this stage is express concern, and we can't put that much pressure on anyone.
The United States has in the past stopped aid to Israel, stopped arms to Israel, but they're unlikely to do that at the tail end of a Biden administration in the middle of an election. And I think Benjamin Netanyahu is playing on that. He realizes that there's a limit to how much pressure United States can bring to enforce a ceasefire, to enforce peace, because Benjamin Netanyahu is taking advantage of that and has decided, I think, that now is the moment to inflict maximum damage on the people they perceive as their enemies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran.
Indeed. Sir William Patty, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme and giving us your thoughts. Let's go straight back to our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, who joins us near the Israeli-Lebanese border. Deborah, I wonder what you're hearing at this moment, because it does still seem like the sirens are blaring across Israel. But before I let you tell us about where you are, I've just got some more lines that are coming in. We understand, based on senior Iranian officials who have told the Reuters news agency, they've said that the order to launch this missile attack on Israel was made by Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. So just some more lines coming in. We heard that the Revolutionary Guard saying that they were doing this in response to the killing of the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, who was killed at the weekend. And we understand from the IDF that 200 missiles have been launched on Israel. Again, unclear whether all of them have been intercepted at this stage.
Yes, and also unclear whether it's all over. There could well be another wave. And actually, just while we've been standing here, we've been hearing small arms fire, probably machine gun fire in the distance over in that way, because at the same time as these strikes from Iran are being launched towards Israel, Israeli forces have launched their limited ground operation into Lebanon, which is still going on. And so you can imagine that there is still clearly fighting going on in that direction. In that direction was where the Iranian missiles came. And I mean, we've got some images, I think, that you've seen from a little bit earlier, where we saw the missiles streaking across the sky. We saw the intercepts going up, and then we saw the explosions when the intercepts were successful. And then we did see others that continued to move on. It's an incredibly difficult operation to try to intercept ballistic missiles anyway, let alone some 200 of them, as you were just saying.
That is
mad. An operation that clearly Israel would most likely have needed its allies' support to help it with. And if it is still going on, and if, as Israel has said in its message that it put out, that the Iranian attack is continuing, then there could yet be more tests to come, and the night might not yet be over.
Deborah, I'm just going to keep you there and bring in our Dominic Waghorn, who is in Washington. And we understand that President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are monitoring the current developments and Iran's attack on Israel from the White House Situation Room. President Biden has said that the United States is prepared to help Israel defend against these attacks and protect American personnel in the region. Let's bring in Dominic Waghorn, who is in Washington. I mean, Don, these are extraordinary developments and scenes, and a very dangerous moment for this region. We are now effectively seeing a confrontation, a very direct confrontation between Iran and Israel. We've also heard that the supreme leader, Iran's supreme leader himself, ordered this, and he said that we are ready for any kind of retaliation from Israel.
Yes, it's a very, very grave moment for the Middle East, but also I think for the world, and you have to wonder what happens next. We obviously cast our minds back to April when Iran launched its first direct attack on Israel. And that was the first time Iran had ever attacked Israel directly, although it has obviously sponsored any number of proxy attacks and allies of Iran to attack Israel in different ways, not only in Israel but also outside of Israel. But that was the first time that Iran directly attacked Israel. And back then it felt almost ritualistic. It was in response to an Israeli attack on its consulate building in Damascus, where a number of assassinations were carried out by Israel. But there was a sense then that the Iranians were saying to Israel, but also to Israel's American patrons and supporters and defenders, that we have to do this. We have to carry this out, this attack, in response to what you've done, but we don't want it to lead to all-out war. And therefore there was an understanding that not just Israel, but America, Britain and other allies of Israel, but also Jordan, would repel that attack and see it coming. And what we saw then was over 100 drones being fired, I think 30 cruise missiles, and I think it was around 120 of what we think we're seeing now being fired at Israel, 120 ballistic missiles. Now, most of those were either shot down or intercepted, many of them before they reached Israel, because Israel and its allies saw that attack coming, and the ones that did get through into Israel didn't do an awful lot of damage. Now, this is very different this time, because these are ballistic missiles, and well-sourced reports claim that these attacks are happening in two waves.
Right, this has already been predicted.
Fired, and then 15 minutes later, another 120 ballistic missiles. Ballistic missiles take, I think, around 12 minutes to get from launch to
so then they'll meet at the same time.
To anticipate, and the Iranians simply have not given Israel and its backers and its defenders enough time to prepare for this, like they did back in April. So this is a much more aggressive attack by Iran. It may be fewer in number of rockets and projectiles fired at Israel, but the nature of this attack is a very
They'll send the drones
attack.
first, then the cruise missiles, then the ballistic
against
missiles.
Israel. It's in response, obviously, to the assassination of Hassan
Send the ballistic
Nasrallah,
missiles.
which I think we have to say is was one of Iran's closest allies, a man who represented so much of what they were trying to achieve in the region. His assassination being avenged now by this unprecedented attack. And ahead of the attack, we had the Americans sounding the alarm, saying they were sending their diplomats in Jerusalem to the shelters, saying that they saw these missiles being prepared for launch and warning Iran not to fire them. Now, well-placed American or well-sourced American journalists are saying that the Israelis told the Americans to sound the alarm, to send a warning to Iran not to carry out this attack, and wanted to send a clear message to Iran, which was, if you go ahead with this ballistic missile attack, we will come after you. We won't respond in a token way like we did back in April, where the Israelis simply, I think, attacked a number of air defense systems near Natanz in Iran. This time, the Israelis have made it very clear they will respond in force, and they expect the Americans to help them do so. And according to the New York Times, Thomas Friedman's article, which was written shortly before this attack happened, his understanding from the Israelis is that they've told the Iranians they will come after their nuclear weapons program. They warned them they will go after their nuclear weapons program if these missiles are launched, and they expect the Americans to support them. So I think what we're looking at potentially here is a ballistic missile war. That is entirely exactly what the Americans have tried to avoid by sending huge numbers of military materiel and forces to the region. They were trying to warn the Iranians, don't get involved in this escalating conflict between Hezbollah and Israel. Sit this one out. It looks as though the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei in Tehran, has decided to do the opposite, to throw the weight of his ballistic missile arsenal into this war, with, I think, consequences that are dire and grave for the region and rather hard to predict at the moment.
Yeah, Dom, as you were saying earlier, you and I were both in Israel when that attack, the ballistic missiles, the cruise missiles, the drones were launched from Iran to Israel. As you say, it was choreographed. It was in the early hours of the morning. The United States and Israel, the UK, other allies in the region were fully aware that it was coming this time round. What we're seeing now, we didn't see anything like this in April, is a very different situation, because at this point we still don't know if all of these missiles have been intercepted. And unlike last time where we saw 300 of those missiles launched, this time it's 200 what we understand ballistic missiles being launched. And we've got some lines that have come in on the Iranian side. The Revolutionary Guard have said that should Israel respond and react, that they will retaliate again with an action like this. So as you say, potentially a ballistic missiles confrontation and war. We also understand that it was Iran's supreme leader who ordered this attack. And we've just been told by the Reuters news agency that Iran's supreme leader, Khamenei, remains in a secure location after those missiles were fired at Israel. That's after he said that we are prepared for any kind of confrontation from the Israeli side. And just to update our audiences on what the White House is currently saying, we understand that President Joe Biden and the Vice President Kamala Harris are monitoring the situation now, the Iranian attack against Israel, from the White House Situation Room.
Right.
And we also understand that President Biden has directed the U.S. military to aid Israel's defense against Iranian attacks and shoot down missiles targeting Israel. Just gives you an idea of perhaps that they may have been caught by surprise, unlike the last time when it was all choreographed, everyone knew what was happening, there were preparations to shoot them down, and
Oh my
that
God,
was a successful
yes.
operation. At this stage, we just don't know where things lie.
Yeah, they weren't taken by surprise in time
Right,
because
right.
they obviously saw the Iranians getting these ballistic missiles ready for launch, because they
Why
had
did
sort of
that-
telegraphed ahead of time that they issued several hours ago that this was a likely possibility. In fact, they said the attack was imminent. So, but the difference, as you say, between what happened today and what happened in April is the Iranians gave them a lot of lead time, days if you like, saying that we're going to attack Israel, but we don't want it to lead to all-out war. That's the kind of understanding we assumed was going on between the Iranians and the Israelis, sworn enemies, but still the kind of understanding that the Iranians were saying to the Israelis, we need to attack, we need to avenge what you've done in Damascus. You have shifted things and you've broken the rules so dramatically that we need to avenge that. We need to carry out this attack, but we're going to give you enough time to prepare for it, and also your allies to prepare for it, so you can shoot down, as you say, around 200 rockets and projectiles that they fired at Israel at night, as well as you say, and most of them were intercepted. There was a bit of damage at an Israeli air base. But what didn't happen was none of those rockets or projectiles hit, for instance, a residential building. Had they done so, had they killed dozens of Israeli civilians, then the Israelis would have felt they had to respond in force in return. Because that didn't happen, the Israelis carried out a fairly token attack on air defences near Natanz. That sent a clear message to
What
the Iranians
the
that the
fuck?
Israelis can hit them where it
How
hurts.
did that?
But they didn't do an awful lot of damage, so the Iranians could then move on and things didn't escalate further. This is a very different situation, because the Iranians did not give them much time to prepare for this. They used ballistic missiles which are faster moving, and with those drones that were fired back in April, they took hours to get to Israel. These are ballistic missiles, and Iran has developed a ballistic missile arsenal that's formidable, is, I think, feared across the region, and Israel has called them out on this and said the West should have done a lot more to neutralise that ballistic missile threat, because obviously in Israel's minds, if you combine that with the nuclear
That is
weapons that
mad.
they say
Yeah,
Iran is
some
developing,
of them
then you
have
have a
hit
very
the face
dangerous
on
arsenal
quite
in
a
the
lot.
hands of their sworn enemies. But despite a lot of Israeli pressure to have that ballistic missile program neutralised, the Iranians have been able to press ahead with it. So their ballistic missiles are extremely effective,
Dom,
and
I'm
took,
just
I think it's
gonna,
around 12
interrupt.
minutes from launch to landing.
Dom, I'm just going to interrupt, because we're just listening to the IDF spokesperson, Daniel Hagari. He's currently speaking in Hebrew, but he's giving a statement to the state following these missiles that were launched into Israel. We've also just received some information from the Israeli ambulance service saying that paramedics are searching sites of rocket strikes, and currently there are no reports of injuries from the fire towards Israel, other than minor injuries from shrapnel or falls on the way to safe areas. So a lot of things developing in Israel at the moment, Dom. I'm just going to keep you there and bring in our Deborah Haynes, who is in northern Israel for us at the moment. And of course, Deborah, You're there because you were monitoring the ground offensive that Israel has just launched on southern Lebanon. But of course, what we've seen are these 200 or so missiles that have been launched from Iran to Israel. And we got some warning, as Dom was saying this afternoon, from the United States, where there were reports that they had informed their allies in Israel that this was imminent. It could come as soon as tonight. But the scenes that we have seen are unprecedented and, quite frankly, extraordinary over the Israeli skies there.
Yes, we were out here when we heard the reporting that the launches had started, and obviously we didn't really know what to expect. And then suddenly we saw these streaks of orange across the night sky, high up in the air, and then we saw the intercepts going in the opposite direction and then exploding way up in the skies above us. Now, I've never seen anything like that with such intensity, just like the number of different streaks and intercepts. And then there was a bit of a lull, and then it happened again. And now I have to say that it's been at least half an hour or so now, and it's been there's been nothing more so far. But when I was speaking to you a few minutes ago, we had to actually cut short the live and run for cover because there was a rocket that we could see behind us. Again, this would have been most likely a Hezbollah rocket fired, and that was the concern too, whether this could be maybe a coordinated strike with Israel's air defences occupied with the ballistic missile threat, and then maybe Hezbollah taking advantage of that and launching strikes. So far, we've only had to run for cover once with that rocket, but clearly we are alert for what could happen. And we also, like I was saying, heard gunfire, machine gun fire in the distance over there. That's Lebanon in that direction behind me. It really is a reminder of the multi-fronted assault that Israel is currently conducting, and then dealing with the consequences of Iran's attack. And that really raises the question of what happens next. If this wave of attacks is now over, and we don't know if that's the case, we don't know if more is going to be coming, then Israel will surely be assessing the damage, and then it will be calibrating its response. Back in April, when Iran launched those more than 300 cruise missiles, ballistic missiles and drones towards Israel, an attack that Israel and its allies successfully defended.
Mate, it has to be
Israel
serious.
was under huge pressure from the US and the UK
Keir
in
Starmer
particular
to speak to him.
as they said, take the win, to take the fact that they had managed to conduct their strike. You remember the Iranian attack was in response
I get
to
Biden
Israel hitting
speaking to him.
Iran's consulate building. That's an outgoing round fired towards Lebanon. It was in response to the Israeli attack against the Iranian consulate and the killings of IRGC
this
members
attack
there.
was serious.
But then when Iran did retaliate, Israel was under pressure not to respond. It did do a limited strike to Iran in return, but it was very contained, and it enabled both sides to move off the ramp of escalation, and the situation went to a sort of calm. And I know from speaking to officials in Whitehall at the time, there was intense concern that that would be the moment that this region ignited into all-out conflict. Fast forward several months, the situation now is so much different. The level of damage that Israel has managed to inflict, in particular on Hezbollah, which is the largest paramilitary force in this region, closely aligned with Iran, and the language also coming from the Israeli Prime Minister directly, really, challenging Iran, to be honest. That's how it's being interpreted. And clearly, in Tehran, the leaders there would have been wondering how to respond, given that the rules of the game had been ripped up so decisively. And they've obviously calibrated the response that they are conducting tonight, most likely in the hope that it won't ignite all-out war, because an all-out war in this region would end badly for everyone, but most likely the most pain would be suffered in Tehran, given the balance of power if you take Israel and its strongest ally, the United States. Iran will not want all-out war. It may not have a choice because, again, it's going to depend on how Israel decides to retaliate. And like I said, back in April, its allies convinced Israel to be restrained in its response. I'm not sure that will happen this time.
Yeah, Deborah, just in response to that, the Reuters news agency reporting that the Supreme Leader ordered this strike, and he said we are ready for any kind of retaliation from the Israeli side, and that we are doing this to avenge the killing of Hamas's leader Ismail Haniyeh and Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah, who was killed here at the weekend in Beirut. But we also understand that the Supreme Leader has now been taken to a secure location. I just have a few updates for our audiences, but I'll keep you there, Deborah. Daniel Hagari, who's the IDF spokesperson, is just updating the Israeli public and the media and indeed the world. He has said that the Israeli military is not aware of any injuries from the Iran missile attack. And we also received that news from Israeli emergency medics who have scanned and checked the area as well to see if there is any major damage or injuries to civilians or any of these projectiles, whether they've gotten through. But what we understand at this stage from the IDF, and you can see those images from a little earlier of those missiles that were launched over the skies. And as we said, we don't know if these are projectiles or if they are being intercepted at this stage. But what we do know is that Daniel Hagari also said that this attack was serious and will have consequences, which is very much in line with what the United States as well has said. The IDF has again told citizens that they are assessing the situation, and it has been decided that it is not permitted to leave protected spaces in all areas across the country. Deborah, I'm speaking to some Israelis tonight who tell me they remain in their bunkers and that the sirens have been ongoing. Just give us a sense of what the situation is where you are.
Well, I mean, in the area where I am, a lot of it has already been declared a secured military zone. This part of Israel had been under Hezbollah rocket attacks for the last year, and it's from around here that you can't see because it's so dark, but way over there in the distance, all along that stretch of the border is where Israeli forces have been mobilizing and then launching their limited attack, their limited offensive inside Lebanon over the last 24 hours. And so in terms of the actual the situation and the sense amongst people here, a lot of people have already left. Many more were evacuated just in the last couple of weeks as the anticipation grew that there would be a potential ground incursion. There's real concerns here of Hezbollah strikes across the border into this area, but as well, I mean, as I was saying before, we saw the Iranian attack as well over the skies, and so this area, like the rest of Israel, is holding its breath and wondering whether the attacks have stopped or whether there's going to be more to come. And I think what you were just relaying there about what the IDF spokesperson was saying, he wasn't giving the all clear.
No, I'm just going to have to clarify that, Deborah, because the IDF said that they've now assessed the situation, and it was decided that it is now permitted to leave protected areas across the country. So clearly giving an indication there to civilians. I'm sorry, I misread that news coming in, but they are saying that people are allowed now to leave protected areas. So clearly indicating that what they understand, that those missiles that were incoming and the wave that we saw a number of waves of missiles and also the sirens blaring. It does appear at this stage that the IDF has told people that it is now permitted to leave protected spaces in all areas across the country.
Well, I mean, Frank, everyone will be feeling a sense of relief to that news, because clearly it's been such a worrying time for people who knew that some kind of retaliation was going to happen, and especially in the last couple of hours when the news was breaking that this attack was going to be imminent. And obviously this is a country that is incredibly resilient. It's been at war for the last year since the October the 7th attack. So the people here are no strangers to having to run for cover. But a barrage at such intensity of ballistic missiles as was launched to Israel tonight will have been a huge shock. But clearly Israel is saying that it, by the sound of things, managed to defend itself from the attack. However, it's important to note that with
Don't think they
Iran's
did, mate.
response,
Do
yes,
not
it's
think
done
they
this,
did.
very public, very conventional missile strike to Israel. But you can well imagine that it might also be seeking less conventional ways of attacking Israel too. It is a master of what is called hybrid warfare, asymmetric attacks. And so while, yes, the all clear has been given for people living in this country, the government will be very alert for any kind of other types of attempts by Iran to undermine its activities. And clearly Iran is sending this message in response to the killing of its allies amongst the Hezbollah ranks and also amongst the Hamas ranks. And it will be obviously looking to see whether this attack is going to change Israel's behaviour. But from everything that we have heard, that everybody's been hearing from the Israeli government, that is highly unlikely. The Israeli government believes that it is needing to respond because this is a country that has been attacked. It needs to restore deterrence and it needs to secure its borders. And you don't get the sense that they believe any of those things have yet been done, which is why I imagine this offensive will continue to escalate.
Yeah, very much so. And we have some news from our sister news network, NBC. They've said that a defense official has told them that in accordance with US ironclad commitment to Israel's security, US forces in the region are currently defending against Iranian launch missiles targeting Israel. So, you know, the United States standing very firmly alongside Israel to defend Israel against those missiles that have been launched. Deborah, I'm going to keep you there and go to our security and defense analyst, Professor Michael Clark, who joins me now. And Professor Michael Clark, we've again,
Michael Clark?
We talked about
Is it
these
him?
ballistic missiles,
Is it the
these
grey-haired
cruise missiles
geezer?
that were launched
Please,
in
please,
April.
come on.
But of course, that appears
Honestly,
now to be
the way that
very,
this
very
geezer
different to
explains
what we have
shit,
seen,
right?
this evening.
Yes, I mean, we're being told figures of about 100, maybe more than 100. That may
It is?
increase during the
I know
evening.
his
I mean,
voice.
there may be more than one attack. And that there's a higher proportion of ballistic missiles involved, which is entirely logical. I mean, the Iranians have got to do something different and more effective than they managed on the 13th of April. What they'll be aiming to do is to overwhelm Israel's defensive system, which is the Iron Dome system. And then behind that, they've got a thing called David Sling, which is a shorter range system which can deal with drones and also low-level ballistic missiles designed really against things like the Russian Iskander missile, things like that. So they do have a pretty good defensive system, and the Iranians will probably be trying at least
A
in
lot
some
have been
places to
intercepted
overwhelm
there.
it. And what we're seeing in the pictures now are indications of the fairly fierce sort of counter-missile battery battle that seems to be going on now above certainly Jerusalem and maybe other cities as well. And interesting that the Americans are saying that they are involved. I was looking this afternoon at what they've got in the area, and it's not a whole lot. I mean, they've got the carrier battle group, the Lincoln, and that's a powerful set of destroyers, as well as the aircraft carrier with its aircraft on board that can shoot down drones. The aircraft can launch missiles that shoot down drones. They've also got with them air defense destroyers that can shoot down ballistic missiles. But the Lincoln Carrier Battle Group is in the Gulf of Oman, or it was up to yesterday, which is actually quite a long way away, rather than being in the Red Sea, which is where a comparable carrier battle group was on the 13th of April. The other one they've got on the way is the Truman. The Harry Truman is a second carrier battle group, very powerful, and the Pentagon has said, yes, that's going to the region. But I looked at that yesterday, and that was still in mid-Atlantic, so it'll be another 36 hours or 48 hours before it's even through the Straits of Gibraltar. So that one won't be able to be part of this. And then the Americans have got
Right,
the Wasp.
right.
That's an amphibious carrier. It's like a helicopter carrier. And again,
Yeah.
they've got some ships with that, which could take part in a defence. And the Wasp is in the right place.
Got Merlin.
And there are some independent air defence destroyers. The Arleigh Burke is there. The Cole is
No.
there. There's another one. I can't remember the name of the third one. But there's at least three which are also in the area. So the Americans could contribute to this with some of their air defence destroyers, but I don't think their main carrier battle group can be doing, is probably too far away to do very much, and their second carrier battle group is still a long way away. So it'll be interesting tomorrow to get some sort of readout as to what the Americans think they were able to do.
Professor Clark, I'm just going to keep you there and just show our viewers the latest pictures that are coming in from Tel Aviv at the moment. I don't know if you can see
right, they're live.
Professor Clark, but you know, the Israelis have said that they have reopened airspace and takeoffs and landings are to resume in the coming hours. That's according to the airport authorities. Lebanon's Minister of Transport also say the airspace will temporarily be closed to air traffic for 2 hours. I guess, you know, the IDF are also saying that they're not aware of any injuries from those missiles. They've been trying to inspect the area. So, you know, at this stage, we're still waiting to find out more. But would it be fair to say that all of those projectiles have been intercepted at this stage?
Well, it certainly looks like it. We've got no reports as up to about 5 minutes ago when I came and sat down here of any casualties. I mean, you may have an update on that, Yalda, but there's nothing so far. And I mean, what we're seeing, all those images that we're seeing is classic air defense stuff. So I guess it's doing its job. And I think the IDF and the Israeli authorities are wanting to create this sense that, look, this is a one-off salvo, we've dealt with it, airspace will be open pretty soon. Now, that may change if the Iranians then launch something else. And I mean, if I was making decisions in Iran, I wouldn't only launch one salvo. However, we'll see what they do. It may be that this salvo of 100-odd missiles, and if more of them are ballistics, then it's possible that this is the best they can do at the time, because it takes time to assemble the 350 or more missiles that they put together on the 13th of April. And remember, on the 13th of April, they were also fired from different places. Some of them were fired from Lebanon, some were fired from southern Iraq, some were fired from Yemen. In this case, it looks as if this salvo has all come from Iran.
1080 people.
And so it may be that this is the best they can do. And if this is the best they can do, then tomorrow Israel will chalk this up as yet another victory, yet another humiliation for Tehran. But it may be too early to say that. The night, certainly in London, the night is still quite young.
Yeah, indeed. Professor Clark, I'm just going to read some of the news lines that are coming through. Iran State TV is reporting that 80% of the missiles that they launched at Israel have hit their targets. That's obviously very different to what the IDF are saying. They're saying that they have assessed the area, the emergency services have assessed the area, and other than a few injuries as a result of shrapnel, they cannot see any major sort of damage done. But as you say, it is sort of quite late in the evening now, and they're obviously just trying to get a sense of, you know, what exactly the damage is.
Yes, and I guess that, you know, by mid-morning tomorrow we'll have an objective view. I mean, it may be that truth lies somewhere in between, though I would tend to believe what the Israelis are saying at the moment, because it's not in their interest to you know, create complete propaganda over this level of damage, because then they will know it will emerge. So in the daylight, when there's a proper battle damage assessment, I imagine what the Israelis are now saying will turn out to be broadly true, and what the Iranians are saying will turn out to be broadly untrue. But, you know, let's wait until we get to mid-morning or noon tomorrow, and then we'll have a pretty clear idea.
He's fucking good, he is.
Yeah, I'm just going to read some other lines that are coming to Israel. We also understand that Keir Starmer has spoken to both Prime Minister Netanyahu and the King of Jordan. Jordan's army says its forces are in a state of readiness to confront any attempts that threaten the kingdom's security. So no doubt this missile attack, this attack that has been launched on Israel is now dragging in the rest of the region, Professor Clark. We're also hearing from Syrian army sources who are saying that the Israeli air defenses have managed to down dozens of Iranian missiles that
Not
flew
all of
over
them.
southern Syria as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, and this happened on April the 13th in the last big attack, is that, certainly Jordan was not at all pleased that a series of missiles, Iranian missiles, flew over their territory, and they did take some action to try to bring some of them down, the missiles and drones. And I think whether or not they can do anything about this one, I would rather doubt. But they'll make the same point that this is their airspace that is being used for an attack on Israel. And I mean, Jordan is in a very invidious position because it's always, of course, it's the state that's right next to Israel. It's always got the most sensitive problem. And I'm glad to hear that Keir Starmer has spoken to King Abdullah II, King of Jordan, who is a very strategic thinker. He's a very acute thinker. I rate him as one of the best strategic minds in the Middle East. I mean, sadly, he's also occupying one of the more weak states in the Middle East in terms of its influence on anyone else. But Jordan is a key state because it's a neighbor of Israel, and because Jordan is one of the countries that can help to engineer some sort of detailed peace. You know, as and when we may get to a stage where a more peaceful future is possible, Jordan is intrinsic to it in one way or another. So I have great faith in King Abdullah II for lots of reasons, and I'm glad that Keir Starmer has spoken to him. And I think it's inevitable that we will, you know, the British will try to do our best to stabilise the results of this night attack, to actually, you know, wind back the escalation dynamic to something where we were, let's say, a couple of days ago, and preferably to where we were more than 2 weeks ago, and just all take a breath and see where we go from here. But of course, the danger is that this may not be the only attack. The danger is that the Iranians will try to do something else, and I suspect that there'll be an uptick in terrorism on behalf of Tehran. Whether or not it has ordered it, I suspect there'll be a lot more terrorism and terrorist incidents, both in the Middle East and possibly in Western Europe. And I think United Kingdom will be one of the targets of potential terrorism. I'm sure our own counter-terrorist forces will be on higher alert because of all of this. So we've got to see how the tension of this evening ratchets up in the days to come. But we should, as the Americans are doing, as we're doing, as I'm sure France is doing, which also has quite a big role to play in this crisis because of its relationship with Lebanon, I'm sure we're all trying to ratchet back the tendency to keep going up the spiral of escalation, because today the Israelis have moved into Lebanon, tonight the Iranians have attacked Israel. It's a real problem, and we've got somehow to ratchet it back.
Yeah, an incredibly dangerous moment. But Professor Clark, back in April, even though it was viewed as a choreographed attack, it was still 300 of these ballistic missiles and drones, cruise missiles that were launched towards Israel. A coalition was formed, made up of, as you say, countries like the United States, Britain and Jordan, that came to the aid of Israel to support Israel. And no doubt we've seen, we may, as you say, by tomorrow morning find out exactly how and who supported Israel in this. Obviously, the United States is saying, in accordance with the U.S. ironclad commitment to Israel's security, U.S. forces in the region have defended against Iranian-launched missiles targeting Israel. That was an order by the Commander-in-Chief, by the President, which is something that we also saw in April. But after the April attack, despite it being coordinated, despite hours, days of warning that Israel and the United States received for it, the warning this time round was, you know, just a few hours, frankly. We found out, you know, a few hours before it happened that they were thinking about doing this. United States warned Israel that it was imminent. Israel responded in a sort of choreographed way in April. You know, the question is, how is Israel going to respond this time round?
Yeah, I think the Israelis will want to show that this attack has had no real effect, because the message from Israel and from Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, directly to Iran, to the leaders of Tehran, has been to say, don't even think about it. You know, don't think about retaliating for the actions we're taking. We're essentially attacking the people who are attacking us. You know, you call it the axis of resistance, we call it the ring of fire. And so we're taking on Hamas, we're taking on Hezbollah, we'll take on the Houthis, and will take on the IRGC-sponsored militias, the Republican Guard-sponsored militias in Iraq and Syria. We'll take them on. And if you think that you can intervene in that, if you think you can retaliate, think again, because we can come for you as well. And that was exactly the message, in very crude language, that Netanyahu delivered. He said, our reach goes everywhere. And at least on paper, if you draw a sort of circle around the range that Israel has got over its neighbours, it runs, you know, all the way around the circle from southern Spain in the west to effectively Afghanistan in the east. And so it is true, it is technically the case that the Israelis can reach anywhere in the greater Middle East. And what Netanyahu was really saying to the Iranians is that we are not frightened to come directly for you if you actually retaliate against what we are doing justifiably against the ring of fire that is trying to destroy us as a country. And that's where we are. Now, that's, you know, we can argue about whether that's a realistic assessment of the situation, but, you know, Netanyahu would not, even 2 months ago, would not quite have said all of that. He wouldn't have said at the United Nations General Assembly last week quite the things he said in the tone in which he said them. The rhetoric has gone up a couple of notches in the last couple of weeks, and all this started just 2 weeks ago today, 15 days ago now, with the pager attack on the Tuesday 2 weeks ago. And that pager attack set off this remarkable series of events in which the Israelis had a very good couple of weeks. They've become very assertive, and they've got their adversaries on the back foot, and they think they've got Tehran on the back foot, and they're going to use this advantage that they've got to the fullest extent. And for the rest of us, the question is, are they overreaching themselves? Should we support it fully, or should we just keep calling for a ceasefire, to ratchet back, to think again? I think by and large, the outside world, the Western world, is saying, be very careful, Israel. We understand why you're doing this, but you can overreach yourself, and we are on the edge of a much bigger
my location's on there.
war. We're closer to it now than we were 2 weeks ago. We're closer to it now than we were 48 hours ago. And so this is a pretty big night, I think, for Middle Eastern politics all round.
The world, I'd say.
Yeah, Professor Michael Clark, we've just received some information from an official Israeli account saying that they have counted the number of ballistic missiles, and they say it's 181. So almost 200, which is what the Iranians said that they had launched tens of missiles on Israel, and that they said that they would do it again if Israel does retaliate. So, you know, you're talking there about ceasefire, but the war of words continues to escalate here, as does the actions on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, there may be a sort of an off-ramp, as they say, at least for this particular event, in that if the Iranians say, well, we've launched 181 missiles, and the vast majority of them were ballistic missiles, and they'll claim to have done lots of damage, and they'll run that claim on their own news sources, and some people will believe it, and some people will choose to believe it, and that's what they'll say. And if the reality that we are able to confirm tomorrow is that actually they've done little or no damage, then that will be the truth of it. So the Israelis will be able to say what they want to say about it, which will turn out to be nearer to the truth, and the Iranians will say what they want to say about it, which won't be very truthful, but maybe enough to get them off the hook of having acted and claimed that their action is effective, and then maybe we can ratchet away from the place that we are this evening.
Indeed, as you say, a very risky and dangerous moment. Professor Michael Clark, thank you so much for joining us. We will be back in the next few minutes for all the latest headlines at the top of the hour. Well, good evening. It's 7 o'clock in the UK, 9 o'clock here in Beirut, where there's been a major escalation here in the conflict in the Middle East. Now, in the past 2 hours, Iranian missiles have rained down on Israel. A siren sounded across the country, with people told to take shelter. The Israeli military say nearly 200 missiles were launched. In the past few minutes, Iranian state TV has claimed that 80% of the missiles launched hit their targets. But the Israelis say there were very few injuries, and that civilians can now come out of their shelters. Well, a series of explosions were also heard in Tel Aviv. Iran says it launched the missiles in response to the assassination of the leader of Hezbollah and the killings of other senior Hezbollah and Hamas militants. Well, around the same time as those rockets were launched, there was a shooting in Jaffa, a mixed Arab Jewish neighborhood in Tel Aviv. Police say that 4 people are believed to have been killed as a result of that attack. But as we've been saying, we've seen this evening nearly 200 missiles launched into Israel from Iran. The IDF have said that they have monitored the situation and they believe that there hasn't been any major damage in the area at this stage, just some small injuries as a result of the shrapnel. I just want to show you and let you listen to the sound of what we believe were the missiles being launched as well as being intercepted. To have a listen.
Not gonna lie, that gave me chills. Oh.
Well, as you can see, the skies over Jerusalem with missiles raining down on Israel, sirens sounding out across the country. People being told to take shelter, and just in the last 10 or 15 minutes or so, the IDF reported that people are able to now leave their safe spaces. They had closed the airspace across the country, but they have now opened the airport and say that flights will resume shortly. They've also said that there hasn't been any major damage done as a result of those almost 200 missiles. The Israelis say 181 missiles were launched into Israel from Iran, and they say that there will be serious consequences. The Iranians have responded and said that the Supreme Leader ordered this attack on Israel. The Revolutionary Guard made a statement to state TV in Iran and said that should Israel retaliate, they will respond again. And they said that they were avenging the death of Hamas's leader Ismail Haniyeh and Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah, who was killed here in Beirut over the weekend. Let's go straight to our Deborah Haynes, our security and defense editor, who joins me now live from northern Israel. And Deborah, we saw some of the sirens that were blaring behind where you were. You had to take cover earlier following concerns about these missiles that were being launched.
Yes, it was actually a rocket that was fired in our direction because we're very close to the Lebanese border, which is Lebanon is behind me, and you've obviously got simultaneously this Israeli ground offensive that's taking place. We've been hearing gunfire from that direction, missile fire from that direction. The first we realised that the attack was actually underway was when we saw these streaks of orange high up in the sky above us. Clearly the missiles that we saw were intended to go much deeper into Israel. We then also witnessed intercepts taking place where you could see a glow of an orange ball moving up to impact the missile coming in the opposite direction, and then an explosion when it successfully hit. But then we did also see some missiles getting through and continuing their route further deeper into Israel, where again you'd imagine air defences would have been deployed. You quoted the Iranians saying that, or claiming that 80% of their missiles struck their target. That is very different picture to the one that we're being told by the Israeli military. The Israeli spokesperson who gave that statement earlier, saying that they believed that the aerial threat had ceased and people could come out of their shelters. He said that there was a lot of intercepts and that just a few of these missiles did impact in central Israel and in parts of the south. He said that there are assessments going on as to any kind of damage, and he said that at that moment they didn't have any reports of casualties, but clearly this is a situation that's very live, and they will be going to the sites of the impact sites, and assessing what, if any, damage was done. And you would imagine that that will also feed into the scale of the response. The Israeli military spokesperson also making the point that there would be consequences, but they would be at a time and a place of Israel's choosing. And bearing in mind that Iran has launched this direct attack on Israel, which is an extraordinary event in itself, in a bid to try to, you'd imagine, stop Israel from attacking its ally Hezbollah, which is what is going on behind me in the distance. There's no sign at all that Israel is going to slow down its operations inside Lebanon. So it really does mean that you have these two countries now in direct confrontation, and the world will be wanting to do all they can to try to contain it. And just one last point, if I may. You were saying earlier about how the Americans have come out and said that they are here to help defend Israel from Iranian attack. It will be really interesting to hear what the British say, whether they might too have been involved, maybe even involved in these intercepts that have just taken place. But we'll obviously be chasing the Ministry of Defence to try to see if we can get any clarity on that.
Yeah, I mean, Deborah, we saw the UK standing and supporting Israel when those strikes, those missiles were launched in April. But no, obviously, this is still very early days. Sir Keir Starmer is believed to have spoken to Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's Prime Minister, as well as the King of Jordan. We've also got a statement here from Downing Street, and I'll just read it to our viewers. The UK completely condemns Iran's actions, and they've reiterated calls for de-escalation across the region. It's understood that more calls with EU leaders are expected this evening. So, the UK standing firm and, saying that they completely condemn Iran's actions. And obviously, there's now a flurry of diplomacy that is going to be taking place behind the scenes with European leaders, the Americans, the British, all expected this evening to have a conversation about de-escalating this situation. Having said that, there are also reports coming in from state media in Iraq, and they have said that, I'm just going to find this, that the Iraqi resistant groups say that US bases in Iraq will be a target if the US joins in the response to Iran's attack here. I mean, we have seen these Iraqi militant groups launch attacks on US bases in the past. They certainly did it after the killing of the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani. They often launch these attacks, and now they're saying that they will target US bases should the United States come to Israel's aid and respond to Iran following this attack.
Well, yes, and that's exactly the worry that that binds all of the allies together when they look at this huge challenge. This is not just a confrontation directly between Iran and Israel, as has just happened now. It's also a potential proxy battlefield where in Iraq, for example, Iran and the US have indirectly been engaged in, you call it hybrid warfare, in indirect contact through these Iranian-backed militias in Iraq. And it's almost like something you can switch on and off, scale it up and down, and it is a way for Iran not to directly confront the United States, because it knows that were it to try that, then that would initiate an overwhelming response against Iran. But to attack US or UK or other allied interests in the region is another pressure point that again raises the risk of miscalculation and of escalation into regional war. And so that is why you are having these conversations that are going to be frantically taking place through the night. The issue that you're seeing is that while, yes, Israel over the last few weeks in particular has faced calls from its closest allies, including the United States, also the UK, for restraint to cease fire in its conflict with Hezbollah, and the concern about what's happening in Lebanon and a desire to try to contain the crisis. When it comes to direct confrontation with Iran, then, I mean, it's just that obviously there is the US and the UK view Hezbollah as a terrorist organisation, but when it comes to direct confrontation with Iran, it's on just another level of concern, and everyone will be wondering whether or not Israel, which has for years now been raising the alarm about Iran's nuclear ambitions, whether that might be something that they will be then considering when it comes to considering what kind of retaliation it will be taking place. I mean, that's obviously, again, almost unthinkable, but we are in a realm now where all of the rules seem to have been, they keep on being ripped up, and it does make it very difficult to predict what's going to happen next.
And Tony Walker's going to be
Yeah, Deborah, I mean, as we look at these images from a little earlier of these missiles that are raining down on Israel and being intercepted, and of course the sirens that were blaring with, you know, millions of Israel citizens taking shelter in bunkers, and we know that the airspace was also closed. The reason you are where you are at present is to monitor Israel's ground incursion into southern Lebanon. Now, the Israeli military have said in a statement that they've ordered the closure of new military areas in northern Israel. So a bit of a development there that they are, while they've said that the scope and geography of this incursion is going to be limited, they've reassured the United States of that. We understand that, you know, more battalions were sent to the area, as well as now they're saying that the Israeli military have ordered the closure of new military areas in northern Israel.
Well, that's really interesting, and it would really point to a potential widening of this operation. The Israeli military, and you know, there's a Israeli security official that was giving a briefing earlier, and he really stressed that the operation is it's localized, it's limited, it's targeted, it's meant to be just across the border into Lebanon, targeting Hezbollah positions and launch sites to try to stop Hezbollah rockets from falling on this side of the border. But then by the afternoon, there was a statement that was released by the military saying
I didn't know
that
it was fucking doing that.
Brigades were being mobilised
Nelly.
for operations in the north to enable the
I was like,
continued
why
fight
is it
against
still
Hezbollah.
like?
So it really does show that maybe Israel is just ensuring it has options. It's clearly given an assurance to the United States that this current offensive is going to be limited.
I'm waiting for another wave, which will be like unexpected.
And Hezbollah has made clear that they are going to resist any Israeli offensive.
Well, actually, I don't.
Nasrallah, before he was killed,
Would they do another wave? Because America's
responding to those pager and walkie-talkie attacks, which do seem
America's
such a long
gonna
time
like
ago now, given events that happened in the interim, but were
shoot them
actually
down
only
as well.
a couple of weeks ago.
So I don't know.
He vowed to stop
dude.
Israel from achieving what it says was its war aim of enabling some 60,000 Israeli civilians that have had to move from across this whole region in the north. That's an outgoing round to enable them to come back to their homes. Hassan Nasrallah said that Hezbollah would stop that from happening. So clearly, those two sides are going to continue to fight. And with what you're saying about a closure of more military zones, that would indicate that the fight is going to be intensifying.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, Deborah, you know, Israel has had tactical success over the course of the last 2 weeks. Following, you know, those pages that were exploding, and then the walkie-talkies, just completely cutting off Hezbollah's communication means and devices. Then, of course, we saw the targeted strikes on top Hezbollah commanders, really isolating the leader Hassan Nasrallah, who had led Hezbollah and turned it into the powerful paramilitary group that it had become here in the region. He himself was revered across the Arab world by other militia groups inspired. The Houthis, for example, in Yemen, as well as the Syrian and the Iraqi militias. He'd sent fighters to Syria to fight. Then, of course, the Israelis assassinated Hassan Nasrallah and virtually decapitated the organization. They've now launched this ground incursion. They promised the United States, reassured them that it is going to be limited. The question is, though, will Israel, after all of these tactical successes, get to a point where it may have overstretched itself by sending, while at present we're told, special forces conducting limited operations, and they themselves,
what game can I play on here while streaming
admitted
where it's like not
the
laggy?
course of the last few months, they have conducted maybe 200 of the very similar operations to what we're seeing at the moment. But now it's all very public and much more open. The concern is, could this escalate? Because Hezbollah has very openly said, please come and, into our terrain, because we want to fight this war with you, on land that is ours, essentially.
Yes, and it was interesting what the Israel Defense Forces revealed about those special forces operations that have covertly been happening over the past year. Some 70 operations, hundreds of days spent inside Lebanon targeting Hezbollah weapons caches, these tunnels that Israel is very concerned about, that it says that Hezbollah has dug under the ground to launch attacks, accusing Hezbollah of preparing to launch an October the 7th style massacre inside Israel, and then overnight last night confirming the beginning of what it's called this limited, localized, targeted offensive with more conventional troops, still light in numbers, we were told, going across the border. But they were defended by pretty heavy barrages of artillery fire. We were in this position last night, and you could hear the steady beat of strikes from this side of the border going into Lebanon, and you could see the orange flare of impact sites. Tonight it is a bit quieter. It was quieter while the missile operations, understandably, were going on. But actually, in the last few minutes, we have begun to hear again a few sounds of artillery, really underlining that this is an operation that those missile strikes have not deterred. The missile strikes happened, and we have heard artillery since then. So clearly, the Israeli ground offensive inside Lebanon, which maybe Iran's actions it was hoping to deter, I'm sure it would have realised it would take more than that, but it is still continuing. So in terms of where we are tonight, you cannot imagine that what Iran has done in terms of retaliation, which it has vowed to do, is going to have much impact on Israel, other than galvanizing Israel's allies like the United States behind it and hardening its resolve to press on with what it sees as a unique moment of momentum. As you were saying, it struck significant blows on Hezbollah, an arch enemy, which they have engaged 2 wars in the past with already. And now the question people are asking is, why would Israel heed calls for a ceasefire when it is at this moment being able to inflict such damage? Someone was saying to me that what they should be intending to do is to actually inflict generational damage on Hezbollah to prevent that group from posing the threat that it has posed towards Israel for such a long time, since its existence, obviously.
Yeah, Deborah, just on that point, just in the last few minutes, Reuters has been reporting that Hamas has praised these Iranian missile strikes, and they say, you know, that they welcome this, the attacks that have been, the attack that has been launched on Israel, avenging the death of their political leader Ismail Haniyeh and Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah. And as we were talking earlier, Iraqi militia saying that they will target and attack US bases in their country should the United States, you know, stand and support Israel and respond to these missile strikes on Israel, which Israel and the United States have both said before it happened. They said that there would be consequences. Now that it has happened, we are hearing from the Israelis that this was very serious and that there will be consequences to this.
Yes, and it's interesting that the response that you're getting from Hamas. You can imagine that maybe they were wondering why it hadn't happened sooner, given that the assassination of Haniyeh was back in July, and some analysts have speculated that maybe the muted, the slow response, the silence from Iran might have further emboldened Israel to take the audacious acts that it has done, beginning with those attacks on Hezbollah's communication devices, revealing its hand and the fact that it had managed to infiltrate Hezbollah's supply lines, and then revealing the enormity of the intelligence that it had managed to gather to be able to pinpoint the location of Hezbollah commanders, and then taking them out right up to Hassan Nasrallah all over the course of the last 2 weeks. And it's only after that that Iran has finally decided to retaliate. And that really does indicate that Iran miscalculated when it came to considering the risk that Israel would be willing to take, a risk that Israel has taken, an action that Israel has taken in the face of calls for restraint by its closest ally, the United States, as well as allies and partners all across the world. It has continued to press on with its attacks, believing that it has to restore deterrence in a region where it's surrounded by countries and militias that want to cause Israel harm.
Deborah, thanks so much. I'm just going to read out a few updates. As we reported earlier, the UK, Downing Street has issued a statement and they say that they completely condemn Iran's actions. We've also got a statement from the White House press secretary saying that the President Joe Biden and the Vice President Kamala Harris are monitoring this situation, and they have had 2 meetings with their national security team in the White House Situation Room today, and they've been receiving regular updates. We also were reporting earlier that the President directed the US military to aid Israel's defense against the Iranian attacks and shoot down the missiles targeting Israel. Of course, the United States informed Israel earlier today and that they would be targeted by Iran. So we are just getting this update from the White House that the President and the Vice President have convened 2 meetings with their national security team in the White House Situation Room today. Let's go straight to our security and defense analyst, Professor Michael Clark, who joins me now. And Professor, I mean, what we've heard in the last few minutes from Iraqi militia, from Hamas, all praising Iran's actions. The Iraqi militias have said that if Israel responds, and should the United States support Israel, which no doubt it will do, bases in the United States will be targeted, which we've seen happen on a number of occasions over the years.
Yes, and we're likely to see more of the same. That's fairly predictable. Whether those attacks will be really consequential, I rather doubt. I mean, the Americans have got about 40,000 troops in the region, spread across the whole of the Middle Eastern region. So there's plenty of bases, and they've got a few bases, 3 or 4, right on the Iraqi-Syrian border because of their operations against Islamic State and some of the related groups. So they have, some hundreds of troops who are in harm's way, and several thousand troops across the region in many bases, like Al Udeid. It's the enormous air base in Doha, just outside Doha, a very big base. So the Americans are not, there are plenty of targets, but the Americans will have been expecting this, and they'll be on full alert. And it's inevitable in a way that Hamas and Hezbollah spokespeople and some of those people from the militias that the IRGC, the Iranian Republican Guard, support, they will say these things, and they will try to create a sort of spike in terroristic activities. I think that's fairly inevitable. There's something else, Yalda, which I think was very interesting in what Deborah was saying. She was pointing out very interestingly and very importantly that a lot of the missiles she could see herself were being intercepted, and there's an explosion, and the debris has got to fall somewhere. And I've just been looking at some footage of some of the debris that seems to have fallen in Amman, in Jordan. And that's inevitable, and quite destructive debris, so it may cause injuries. But she also pointed out, very importantly, that some of the missiles just carry on their way. And it's really important to understand, when we're trying to think about how effectively the Iron Dome, Israel's defense system, works, is that what they do is they track incoming missiles. And if they think that the missile is going to land in a place that doesn't matter, they just let it go. Because there's no point using a very expensive air defense missile against something that's going to fall into the middle of the desert. And the point about this is that ballistic missiles are much more predictable than cruise missiles. If a cruise missile is on its way, although a cruise missile is much easier to shoot down, it's harder to predict where it will go because it's programmed to go to a particular target, and it may be programmed to dodge around and go on a decoy and then turn back in and so on before it reaches its target. So you don't really know, and you've got no choice but to shoot cruise missiles down if you can. But ballistic missiles, the sort that the Iranians are using, are almost certainly the variations of the Fateh 110, which they've developed many years ago. They only burn for maybe 30, 40 seconds or something like that, and then they're on pure ballistics. So once the takeoff has been detected, and they're easy to detect on takeoff because they're slow and they have a very big signature. So once the missile is taken off and it's burned, it's pure ballistics. It's just like throwing a stone. So it's going then in an arc, and although it's a very big arc, and although it's actually very hard to defend against, it's actually easy to work out where it's going to land. And so the whole of the Iron Dome system is also built on a very sophisticated monitoring system, and they work out which missiles they need to intercept and which they just let go. And so when the Iranians can claim that, oh, lots of missiles have landed, some of them probably will have. Some of them will have landed in the middle of nowhere, and the Israelis have just let them go. That's the way the Iron Dome system works, which will complicate some of the claims that will be being made tomorrow morning, but we'll get to the bottom of it, I think, fairly quickly.
Yeah, Professor Michael Clark, just help our audiences understand the entirety of their interception system, because of course there is the Iron Dome, but there's David Sling and there is the Arrow as well.
Yeah, indeed. And they all work at different levels. And so the problems of intercepting missiles depends on the altitude of them, how high they are, and how fast they're going. And so what the Israelis have developed, partly with some of their own, a lot of their own technology, but some American technology and some Patriot batteries, and Patriots are the best batteries in the world at shooting down anything, really, but they're also very expensive. I mean, every Patriot battery costs about $1 billion, and that's about 400 million for the battery and about 600 million for the ammunition, all the rockets that it fires. So they're very expensive, and you don't use Patriots against some cheap $20,000 drone. And so the Israeli defense system is based on, as you say, it's the Arrow system, David Sling, and the Iron Dome itself. It's not all Iron Dome. Iron Dome is the big overall system, and they've got a lot of Patriots too. So the system is very sophisticated, but it's also based on the ability to let things go as well as knowing what you have to intercept.
Yeah, indeed. And despite this interception, despite the IDF saying that, I'm just going to read this update, they said that they've identified approximately 180 missiles fired towards the Israeli territory from Iran. And security officials have said that the Israeli Air Force, in cooperation with the US Air Force, intercepted most of the missiles. Several hits were identified and damage is being assessed. So, Professor, they're basically assessing at this stage, although ambulance services, the IDF spokesperson has said that there are minor injuries, but, from what it sounds, contradicts what Iranian state TV, who are claiming that, 80% of them managed to reach their targets.
Yeah, and you would expect minor injuries because when a missile is intercepted, the debris has got to fall somewhere. And that seems to have happened at the one case I saw a few minutes ago in Amman, by the look of it. So, yeah, I mean, destructive debris will fall, and you would expect there to be some injuries. So that's logical. That doesn't mean to say the attack has been successful, but it will give the Iranians something to talk about tomorrow, and it will give the rest of us something to assess. And we'll see where we are with it. The Israeli approach to this seems to be to absorb the attack, to regard it as over and done with as quickly as possible, and then to turn around to the Iranians and say, okay, if that's your best shot, what have you got left? I mean, the Israelis do seem to be in a very bellicose mood at the moment, which is why I think London and Washington, they're all saying we support Israel's right to defend itself, but be careful. I mean, for heaven's sake, let's get to a ceasefire as soon as possible. And I think, as Deborah was saying, that's not really on Israel's agenda at the moment, because they're doing so well, or they think they're doing so well, that they're not terribly interested in pulling back.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on that point with you. I've just got a resident of Tel Aviv here. I'm just going to keep you there, Professor Clark, and go to Giordana Levy, who joins me live now from Tel Aviv. She's a mother of 3, and she's currently sheltering from the Iranian attack. Giordana, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. If you can just tell us where you are and what you heard and what you did.
Good evening, Yalda. Thank you for having me. So it's been a crazy evening. I have to say, listening to the siren on the program was giving me some kind of anxiety, because I thought it was happening again. So I'm currently at home. We've been instructed by the Home Front Command around 7:30 to stay close to a shelter area. Thankfully, I live in an apartment that has a shelter. So. And then basically the siren started, and it's just been going on for, to be honest with you, I sort of lost the track of time, something probably over an hour. I was there with my husband and with my 3 children. And we heard very loud explosions. The ground has been shaking quite a lot. And, you never know if it's the explosions are actually interceptions or if actually something has been hit. And now we've been instructed by Home Front Command that we can actually leave the shelters, but we should stay close by just in case.
Yeah, Giordana, just tell me, because news of this came out that there might be an imminent attack on Israel. The United States told their Israeli counterparts that Iran was considering launching this attack imminently as early as this evening, and that has happened. Were you informed and told, earlier in the day that this may be coming, and people need to stay at home and seek refuge in their shelters when it does happen?
Yeah, it was I think around 4 p.m. that I started hearing this report. And, in Israel, we've been living a crazy life for the past year. We, especially in Tel Aviv, we see it really as a way of living to move forward and keep on with the lives, and letting our kids keep on as much as possible within some kind of safety to go on with their lives. So my kids were at their sports activities and whatever. And this threat from Iran has been always present. It's not something new. We've had an attack in April, very similar to this one. So it's not something new. As the evening, as it came darker, I asked my daughters to come home, and also then the Home Front Command started to instruct people to stay close by a shelter area. So when that instruction came out, we were all sort of ready. And there's been a terror attack also just around 8 p.m. in Tel Aviv. 6 people have been killed. Apparently, 2 terrorists from Hebron just started shooting at people on the light rail. So it's been a very intense night. It's been a very intense year, but to be honest with you, I'm still shaking, and it's a very difficult time.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that the sound of the sirens on our program must be making you quite nervous. But you know, you talked about that attack in April. I was in Israel at the time. It was nothing like what we have seen this evening. Certainly the sirens didn't go off for as long as they did. And this, you know, does feel like it was completely different to what we saw in April.
Absolutely. It's definitely an escalation. And Israel will have to react, and we'll see where this will lead us. I mean, this is an unprecedented attack that any country cannot, you know, let just happen. So we'll see how the government and the army will react. But it's a crazy. I mean, I'm actually was raised in Italy, so for somebody who's European. And I've been living here for 20 years, so I've been living through some wars and some operations. But this past year, with what happened, it's something that no country can live with. And I don't know how much of it is explained in the European media, but no country can allow terrorist organizations to come in and butcher people, send missiles. I don't know how much, again, it has been reported in Europe about Hezbollah started shooting rockets every day to the northern communities in Israel since October 8th, really. And all the populations living in north of Israel has been evacuated. We have evacuees from the north for a year. And this operation in Lebanon has happened in order to be able to bring back those evacuees to their communities, to their homes. And it's just crazy. It's war, and it's scary, and you don't really know what's next. And we're dealing with that. You know, we move forward. We listen to the instructions.
Yeah, Giordana, I mean, you were talking there about, you know, no country being able to tolerate something like this. You're a mother of 3. Do you worry, though, that this situation is going to escalate into all-out war in the region? I mean, we've seen already Israeli forces conducting a ground incursion in Lebanon. And obviously the people here, I've spoken to so many mothers here in Lebanon who are so worried about their own children. No doubt you are extremely worried about your children. You know, how concerned are you that this is going to escalate further?
I'm extremely concerned, and I think any mother around the world feels empathy towards another mother that is worried about their children in war. It's not right. But with the same breath, I will say that this situation is unbearable. Again, no country can deal with what we have been dealing with for a year. No country. And the unprovoked attack of October 7th, the ongoing attacks from Hezbollah for a year, the attacks from Iran, the attacks from Yemen, who's like a country where basically they have hunger issues, and they've been sending rockets and not rockets, missiles and drones to Israel. It's an insane situation, and it's intolerable, and I don't think any country can continue with this. So I am, yes, to answer your question, yes, I'm terribly concerned about a larger conflict, but at the same time, something has to be done for this to stop, for these threats to be over. And I don't know, a ceasefire, if it's going to bring an end to just threats, yes,
what have I
I'm all
missed?
for it.
Nothing.
But if it's just to put on pause and allow this terrorist organization to rearm, and if it's going to bring an end to just threats,
There's military operations in Lebanon will continue tonight.
To put on pause and allow this terrorist organization to rearm and to reorganize themselves, then no, we have to end this.
Wouldn't try to run into it as well, yeah.
Giordana, what
Lost
do
her.
you tell your children, especially when the sirens go off and you have to go into a
Sorry.
bunker?
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me, Giordana?
Yeah, sorry, we've been disconnected.
After tonight.
So again, it's not something new. We've been having rockets for a year, not daily, not in this scale. But, our kids are and they just know what to do. They hear a siren, they go to a shelter. If they're in school, they go to a shelter. And if they're in the middle of the road on a bus, they know they need to get off and find a shelter or lie down on the floor. Again, it's an unreal scenario for Europeans or whoever doesn't live in a conflict area.
Oh, what do I have to
I
eat?
explained to them the situation. I'm not teaching my kids to hate anybody. I'm not telling them, I'm not teaching them to hate. I'm just explaining them the situation and what's happening. And clear instructions, I think, is always so. I think and panic when you hear a siren. And I hope, this will be just a memory when they grow up, and hopefully they can grow up in a different kind of Middle East. I genuinely hope for that, because I'm pretty sure that, especially the mothers all over the Middle East, they just really want peace and a better future for their kids. I know that Israeli mothers want that. So I hope we can achieve that. And if a larger conflict needs to happen in order for us to achieve that, then let it happen. Let's also not forget about the 101 hostages still being held in Gaza. It's insane. I don't know if people still remember what happened there. There's been kids, toddlers, babies, older people still hostages in
Gaza.
in tunnels, and the Red Cross is not allowed to see them. It's insane what's been happening, really.
Oh, shit.
So I really hope we can wake up, maybe not tomorrow, but soon, to a different Middle East that we can all work harder to build.
Okay.
And
So, right.
achieve a better future for our kids.
Giordana Levy, we're really grateful that
Do
you
that real
joined us,
quick.
on the program from your shelter there in Tel Aviv.
Thank you, and I wish you all the best in Lebanon. I really hope
Wait,
everybody will be.
why did I go to
we
check
can meet,
check
for a
Czechia?
glass of wine here with Tel Aviv. Bye.
Thank you, Giordana, for joining us here on the program.
What
Just,
the f-
to bring you up to date on the current situation, the IDF has reported that they have identified approximately 180 missiles that have been fired towards Israeli territory from Iran. You were listening there to an Israeli mother talking about having to go into a shelter that they were informed about 4 o'clock local time, following the United States' warning to Israel that Iran was planning to launch hundreds of missiles towards Israel. And we saw those images this evening. Now, Israel's Defense Forces spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, has given this update a little earlier. Just have a listen.
Good evening. At this point, we do not detect any further threats from Iran in Israel's airspace. You can come out of the sheltered areas, but you must continue to comply with the instructions of the Homefront Command. I would like to ask you to continue to behave responsibly and be alert. During our defense, we had quite a few interceptions. There are a few hits in the center of Israel and in a few places in the southern region. We are still doing a situation estimate. We don't know of anyone who's been injured, and that is thanks to your behavior, to your responsible behavior. And we also ask you not to give information to the enemy and not to pass on any locations and documentations from places that were impacted. We are both on the defensive and on the offensive. We are going to protect the citizens of Israel. There will be implications to these launches, and we will retaliate whenever and wherever we choose to do so. I will be here later this evening in order to inform you on any development. Please continue to be responsible. Questions. Walla News, can we expect any further launches? Like I told you, I come here after a situation estimate with the Chief of General Staff. We've been updated by the Air Force, by our partners from the U.S. as well. And at this point, we do not detect any further threats in Israel's airspace. And this is why we gave the instructions to leave sheltered areas. And we continue to monitor the situation. And if any change in the instructions occur, we will update you. Channel 12, will the IDF respond soon? Like I said, we have plans. We are very strongly prepared on the offensive. We're going to hold a situation estimate and we will act whenever and wherever we choose to. Khan 11, do you think that we are at the cusp of a regional war? This is a multi-arena war, like I've said, and it's not for the first time that we've had these airstrikes from Iran, and this one was more extensive, but we did tailor the proper response to it. As we've seen, there were very few hits and no one was injured because everyone in Israel behaved responsibly and complied with the instructions. And we also operated our defensive systems, ours and our partners, in order to protect Israel's airspace. And we will continue to do the same, both of the offensive and the defensive. Israel Hayom, is the IDF ready with immediate response? We have the capabilities and we are at peak preparedness. We are
Doesn't look like
conducting
it.
this warfare in several arenas. This was very severe. What just happened now, there will be repercussions and we will take action whenever we choose to, wherever we choose to. Thank you very much. I will return to update you with any further developments. I would like to ask all Israelis to continue to behave responsibly. Everybody behaved in an exemplary fashion and that saved lives, but there are other difficult things happen. There was a terror attack in Jaffa. We will continue to update you.
Typhoons?
You were listening there to the IDF spokesperson, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, saying it's a multi-arena war. And of course, they have been attacked by Iran before, but this strike on Israel by Iran, he said, was more extensive. However, we did what we needed to do and took all the appropriate action. No one was injured. Now, Iran is responding to what Israel is saying, and they're saying that Iran's Revolutionary Guards are saying that they are continuing to target 3 Israeli military bases in missile attacks. Israeli media are also citing that the Israeli military are saying that their air force will continue conducting powerful strikes tonight throughout the Middle East, and we have seen those strikes here in the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Throughout the day, we've seen drones hovering much louder than in the past week, and of course the sonic booms as well. So the Israeli military say they will continue conducting their powerful strikes tonight throughout the Middle East. It's unclear exactly where else they are talking about. Now, you're looking at images right now of the White House. The briefing has begun, and we can see the press secretary as well as the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. Let's have a listen in.
Thank you, Karine, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to provide a brief report on the Iranian ballistic missile attack against Israel that occurred earlier today. I can take just a few questions because this is an ongoing situation and I need to get back to my desk. Today, Iran launched nearly 200 ballistic missiles towards targets in Israel. The United States military coordinated closely with the Israeli Defense Forces to help defend Israel against this attack. U.S. naval destroyers joined Israeli air defense units in firing interceptors to shoot down inbound missiles. President Biden and Vice President Harris monitored the attack and the response from the White House Situation Room, joined in person and remotely by their national security team. We are still working with the IDF and the authorities in Israel to assess the impact of the attack. But at this time, and I stress at this time, we do not know of any deaths in Israel. We are tracking the reported death of a Palestinian civilian in Jericho in the West Bank. We do not know of any damage to aircraft or strategic military assets in Israel. In short, based on what we know at this point, this attack appears to have been defeated and ineffective. This was first and foremost the result of the professionalism of the IDF, but in no small part because of the skilled work of the U.S. military and meticulous joint planning in anticipation of the attack. We are also aware of reports of a terrorist attack in Jaffa that took the lives of a number of Israeli civilians and wounded several others today. Our condolences go out to the families of the victims and to the family of the Palestinian civilian in Jericho. Obviously, my update here is based on early reports, and we reserve the right to amend and adjust as necessary as we gather more information. The word fog of war was invented for a situation like this. This is a fluid situation. We will consult with the Israelis on next steps in terms of the response and how to deal with what Iran has just done, and we will continue to monitor for further threats and attacks from Iran and its proxies. We are particularly focused on protecting U.S. service members in the region. And with that, I'll take just a few questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Jake. Is the administration making any preparations to evacuate U.S. citizens from Lebanon or elsewhere in the region?
We have been very clear for some time now that U.S. citizens should avail themselves of commercial means to depart Lebanon, given everything that's going on. We have said that from this podium, from multiple podiums. We continue to say that, but we have not begun triggering a non-combatant emergency evacuation, a NEO, and do not have an intention to do so at this time. If that changes, we'll let you know. But we continue to reinforce the point. American citizens in Lebanon should follow the guidance from the State Department, which is to find civilian commercial means to depart, because in extremis, we may not be able to get them out safely. Yes.
Thanks, Jake. What is the U.S. view on whether Israel should retaliate, and what is your concern about this leading to a wider escalation of war in the region?
We've had some initial discussions with the Israelis in the aftermath of this at the military level and also at the White House to Prime Minister's office level. We'll continue those conversations in the hours ahead. I'm not going to prejudge or get ahead of anything. We want to have some deep consultations with the Israelis, and I'll have more to report to you after we get the opportunity for deeper discussions.
And escalation in the region?
Obviously, this is a significant escalation by Iran, a significant event, and it is equally significant that we were able to step up with Israel and create a situation in which no one was killed in this attack in Israel so far as we know at this time. We are now going to look at what the appropriate next steps are to secure, first and foremost, American interests, and then to promote stability to the maximum extent possible as we go forward. Yeah.
Back in April, the president's message to Israel was to take the win when the U.S. and Israel were able to intercept the barrage of Iranian missiles. Is he recommending a similarly limited response this time?
I will not, from this podium, share the president's recommendations. He will have the opportunity to share them directly. We're going to have, as I said, ongoing consultations with the Israelis this afternoon, this evening. It is too early for me to tell you anything publicly in terms of our assessment or in terms of what our expectations are of the Israelis or the advice that we will give them.
So will he be speaking to Prime Minister Netanyahu today?
I don't have anything to announce from this podium, but I can tell you that he is tracking this minute by minute. We are very much deeply in touch with the Israelis, and insofar as we have calls to read out, we'll make sure to read them out with you. Just last question, then I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Jake. In April, after Iran struck Israel, the U.S. issued a number of sanctions as a consequence. This morning, the president said there would be severe consequences if Iran carried out this attack. What are those consequences, and are they more severe than sanctions?
Totally legitimate question, and that answer will come based on the conversations and consultations we have with our Israeli counterparts. It's too soon for me to stand before you today and give you an answer. What I can tell you is this. We are proud of the actions that we've taken alongside Israel to protect and defend Israel. We have made clear that there will be consequences, severe consequences for this attack, and we will work with Israel to make that the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Jake. Okay, on to the rest of the programming here. This morning, President Biden was briefed by his Homeland Security Advisor, Liz Sherwood-Randall, on the latest impacts of Hurricane Helene, and this afternoon he will receive an interagency briefing on the Hurricane Helene response and recovery
Well, in the last few minutes, you were listening to the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan speaking there and saying that this was clearly a significant escalation by Iran. He also said and confirmed that nearly 200 missiles were launched by Iran on Israel, and said that the
can't
US
believe.
military coordinated closely with Israel to help defend Israel, and said
Destroyers.
that they had interceptors to take down incoming missiles. He said that President Joe Biden was monitoring the developments minute by minute alongside the Vice President Kamala Harris. They were both following in the Situation Room. They said that the situation is fluid, but it all came down to the skilled work and meticulous joint efforts of both the US and their Israeli counterparts. So a response there from the US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan confirming that the United States coordinated closely with Israel to help defend Israel following the almost 200 missiles that were launched on Israel by Iran. Let's go to our security and defense analyst, Professor Michael Clark, who has also been listening in. And Professor Clark, I mean, the reporters there were asking Jake Sullivan about concerns, whether this will escalate. Interestingly, he said, we are obviously monitoring the situation and we're going to now coordinate to discuss what the next steps are. He said that there were, at present, from what they understand, no deaths other than they did say that a Palestinian was killed in the West Bank, but he said that the situation is incredibly fluid at the moment, as is expected.
Yes, and I mean, as we were saying earlier on, I mean, both for you and for me here in London, the night is still young and things may still happen. But interestingly, he was confirming what Daniel Hagari had said a few minutes before, the Israeli spokesman, Admiral Hagari, which indicated they think this is a one-shot. They think that this is it for this evening, and that may be true. And the answer is, as Hagari said, there have been some hits in the south. In other words, some of the missiles did land, and as we were saying before, remember the south of Israel is rather less populated than the north, and so if a missile was going to the south and it was going to fall into open country, they'd probably just let it. So he said some hits in the south, some injuries, no deaths, and that's what Jake Sullivan seemed to also indicate. And so the Americans are saying that, as the Israelis are, that this has been ineffective. So we'll see if that still holds up tomorrow, but I suspect it probably will. But this may not be the end of it, because we'll see how people react tomorrow. And as Jake Sullivan said, this is still a very delicate moment, and as you and I have talked about in the last hour, we are on the edge still of a widespread regional war. And when Jake Sullivan was saying, well, I'm going back into the Situation Room now, and we'll be discussing with President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris what we do next, I'm sure the American approach will be a two-pronged approach. It'll be to call for calm and ceasefire and everybody to step back. But equally, it will be to indicate to the Iranians, don't think that we, just because we're coming up to an election, that we won't act. It's not a good thing that a president coming up to an election takes big military action, but I'm sure he'll be saying, don't think we're frightened to do that. And so it'll be a sort of dual message, one very specific message, I think, to Tehran, and a more general message to the region to say that we've got to take a couple of steps back from the hot-headed comments that have been made by all sides, including some in Israel as well. I'm sure that will be the approach when we see more of it, probably early on tomorrow.
Yeah, Professor Clark, the Israeli media is saying that Israel's military are saying their air force will continue to conduct powerful strikes tonight throughout the Middle East. It's unclear. I mean, we've obviously had bombardments here and the aerial campaign in Beirut. We've seen it in southern Lebanon as well as in the east of the country and areas in the north as well over the course of the last couple of weeks. But the Israeli military are saying, despite these missiles being launched tonight on Israel, we are going to continue launching, and they've said powerful strikes tonight across the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing here is the fact that the Israelis are now cashing in on a great deal of their intelligence work that's been going on for literally years. I mean, the pager attack of 2 weeks ago, exactly 2 weeks ago, was actually years in the preparation, or at least a year, more than a year probably in the preparation, and then it came together very, very quickly. And what Israeli intelligence knows a great deal about Hamas, a great deal about Hezbollah. It's got Hezbollah quite thoroughly penetrated at certainly many levels. And many of the IRGC, the Iranian Republican Guard Corps, are well understood and well known by Israeli intelligence. And the whole point about intelligence assets is that normally when you know something, you just leave it there until you need it. Well, they've decided in the last couple of weeks to need everything. And so they're actually paying off all of their intelligence contacts, and they are now attacking the places where they know their enemies are in this ring of fire that surrounds them. So they're going for broke, at least tactically, over the next few days.
Indeed, that's certainly what it looks like. Professor Clark, we're going to keep you there as we're going to continue our coverage of the developments here in the Middle East. So do stay with us. Good evening. It's 8 o'clock in the UK, 10 o'clock here in Beirut. I'm Yalda Hakim, and we've been monitoring the escalating situation here in the conflict in the Middle East. Tonight, Iranian missiles have rained down on Israel as sirens sounded across the country, with people told to take shelter. The Israeli military say nearly 200 missiles were launched. In the past hour, Iranian state TV claimed that 80% of the missiles launched hit their targets, but the Israelis say there were very few injuries and that civilians can now come out of their shelters. Well, a series of explosions were also heard in Tel Aviv. Iran says it launched the missiles in response to the assassination of the leader of Hezbollah and the killing of other senior Hezbollah and Hamas militants. Well, videos have been shared on social media which shows a missile landing near Tel Aviv. Let's just have a listen.
What? I want to say it. Allah, Allah, Allah.
And in this video that has been shared
Allah.
online, people
Allah.
at the Al-Aqsa hospital in Gaza appeared to
Allah.
be cheering as
Allah.
they watched the missiles being fired at Israel,
Anyway.
which really gives you a sense of the tensions that remain after a year following the October 7 attack on Israel by Hamas
Oh, that's in
militants.
Gaza.
And they, killed 1,200 Israelis and took several hundred civilians into Gaza, as well as members of the IDF. But then, of course, we saw a year-long war in Gaza, which left more than 45,000 people dead. So you can see there the cheering that was taking place in Gaza. Now you're looking at the scenes in Jaffa, where we understand that there was a shooting in a mixed Arab-Jewish neighborhood in Tel Aviv. Police say that 4 people were killed, as well as 2 gunmen, although Israeli media is reporting that up to 8 people died. Now, of course, this all comes after Israeli troops launched a ground incursion into Lebanon in what the Israeli military called a limited, localized and targeted ground operation against Hezbollah. It's understood Sir Keir Starmer has spoken to both the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the King of Jordan this evening. Well, let's just show you those ballistic missiles that were launched, raining down over the skies of Israel following Iran launching that attack. Downing Street, as we've reported, have said that they completely condemn Iran's actions. And in the last few minutes, we were hearing from the National Security Advisor of the United States, Jake Sullivan, saying that Iran has dramatically escalated the situation. Let's just have a listen in as we heard sirens, as well as those missiles raining down and then being intercepted. nearly 200 missiles were launched into Israel by Iran, and you can see the sound of sirens. They warned residents and citizens to seek shelter, and much of the country were in their bunkers as this attack was launched by Iran into Israel. According to the IDF and the National Security Advisor of the United States, Jake Sullivan, there were no injuries, although he did say the situation is fluid and they are in a position to, there were no deaths. But we do understand that there were some small injuries as well. He did say a Palestinian was injured. Let's just have a listen to Matt Miller, who's speaking at the State Department at the moment.
The President's National Security Team in monitoring this attack as it was unfolding, as well as our response. As the President has made clear, our support for Israel's security is ironclad. We will continue to stand with the people of Israel at this critical moment. With that, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. So I think this probably goes without saying, but just to make sure we get on the record. So in terms of what happened in Israel, there no damage to any U.S. facilities, no injuries, no nothing?
At this time, we are not aware of any damage to U.S. facilities. As you know, we issued an order earlier today for our personnel, State Department personnel in Israel to shelter at their homes. We have full accountability for all our personnel. We're not aware of any civilian casualties inside Israel, let alone an American citizen casualty. There is one report of a Palestinian who died in the West Bank, but no damage to any U.S. facility either.
And then both you and the National Security Advisor just a few minutes ago talked about this being a brazen and unacceptable escalation. But does the administration see anything that Israel has done over the course of the last 3 weeks as escalatory?
So certainly they have done things to expand the conflict. But if you look at the actions that they have taken, they were bringing terrorists to justice, terrorists who have launched attacks on Israeli civilians. If you look at what Iran did today, we have been warning for some time about the threat posed by Iran arming and funding terrorist groups across the Middle East, and the attack today just demonstrated the danger of those actions. What you saw was Iran launching a state-on-state attack to protect and defend the terrorist groups that it has built, nurtured, and that it controls. So there is a difference between the actions that we have seen Israel take to defend its civilians and what we've seen Iran take.
I'm not trying to suggest that they are equivalent. I just wanted to make sure that you didn't see.
No, we have certainly seen we've certainly seen Israel expand the nature of its attacks against Hezbollah, but it is a very different type of attack than what we saw today from a state actor against another state.
Okay, and then last one, and this has to do with Lebanon and the northern front. The situation there is, unstable and uncertain. I know that you guys have been asking Americans who might want information about assistance and possibly leaving to sign up on a form. Can you give us an update on the numbers of those and whether or not you're planning to I don't know, to do anything in the way of either U.S. government capabilities or charter flights or ferries?
Sure. So you're right. As we often do in these situations, we have directed U.S. citizens who are in Lebanon to register with the State Department for information, and especially for information with how to depart Lebanon, and we're providing them whatever information we can. We have had, as of today, around 6,000 American citizens in Lebanon who have registered with us for further information. Should be clear, not all of those American citizens are seeking assistance with departing. People are just looking for information. They're looking for options. There are a number of American citizens who live in Lebanon who have lived there for years and do not want to depart the country. So in terms of the status on the ground, the airport is still open. Commercial flights are operating, although they are available at times at reduced capacity. We are working right now with airlines to provide additional flights with more seats for American citizens. It's something that we hope to turn on in the next few days, and we will be in touch with American citizens if and when we're able to expand that capability.
How do you ensure that there are going to be seats reserved for Americans?
We're working with, I can't get into the details, but we're working with commercial carriers to ensure that capability. And when we have further information and we've locked this down, it's something we'll communicate directly with American citizens who've asked for information, and then I'll be happy to come and talk about it here at the briefing room.
Thanks.
Yeah, Jim.
So given that the Secretary and the National Security Advisor just said that this attack by Iran is sort of definitively escalatory in nature, I know that you've been telling us, the Secretary even told us that for months you've been encouraging the Israelis not to respond to attacks and provocations in such a way that escalates anything further. Is the Secretary going to continue to offer that same advice to the Israelis now in the wake of these missile strikes?
I'll say a couple things about that. First, of course, Israel has the right to defend itself, as any nation does. In terms of what Israel's response will be, of course, there must be consequences for Iran for this attack. We've made clear that there must be consequences. I'm not going to get into what those consequences are today, but there are things on which we will be coordinating with our Israeli counterparts. And I think in the immediate aftermath of this attack, we are going to coordinate with them on what any response might be. I think it's important that we are able to defeat this attack through successful work with Israel and with our partners, and we will work with them on what a response might look like, but I'm not at the position just 2.5 hours after this event occurred to offer what that might look like today.
The Iranian Foreign Ministry people have said that now that they gave the U.S., I don't know who, a heads up in advance of these missile strikes today through diplomatic channels. Is that true?
That is absolutely false. We had no kind of warning from the government of Iran that they were going to launch such an attack. Yeah.
Given you're not going to detail what the consequences are going to look like yet, understandably you guys are in conversations with the Israelis about that. Can you give us a sense for how U.S. officials are thinking about this right now in terms of magnitude of a response? Will it be more severe than the U.S. response to the Iranian attack on Israel in April, given your...
So I think it's too early to get into what the response might be. As I said, we're just a couple hours after this event having occurred. It's important that all of us inside the United States be able to take stock of the attack, be able to take stock of what occurred. As I said, there are initial assessments, but we need time to collect all of the information. And then we need time to talk with our Israeli counterparts, and we need time to talk to other partners in the region about the way forward. And we'll do that over the coming days. But it is clear that this was once again a significant escalation by Iran. When you see Iran launching attacks on another state, ultimately to come to the defense of a terrorist organization. It is an escalation, and Israel has the right to defend itself, but we will coordinate with them on what any response looks like.
How much more worried are you about a regional war today than you were in previous days before this attack occurred?
So I've gotten that question a number of times over the past year, and I never want to try and calibrate our level of concern, only to say, or other than to say, that preventing the outbreak of a full-scale regional conflagration has been one of our priorities since October 7th. It's something that we immediately identified was a risk after Hamas launched its brutal attacks on Israel, and something that we have been working to prevent. There have been a number of times in the past 12 months where it looked like we might reach such a conflagration. April 13th is one of them, quite obviously. And the United States, through a combination of deterrence and diplomacy, has been able to prevent such an outbreak of full-scale war. And we will continue to try and prevent an outbreak of full-scale war in the days and weeks ahead.
Just a few more questions. Is Iran's nuclear program a legitimate target for an Israeli response?
Again, I don't want to get into, and this is not to to say that I'm ruling anything out and that I'm ruling anything in, but I would answer any question this way, which is, we want to have these conversations directly with our Israeli counterparts over the coming days. It's clear that this was an unacceptable attack, and as we made clear before this attack, there will be consequences for it, but I think it's appropriate that we discuss those consequences with our Israeli counterparts before we talk about them publicly.
Any other countries involved in defending Israel alongside the United States?
There were partners, as I said in my opening comments, who assisted in the defense of Israel. I will let all of those partners speak to their own actions.
And last question, is the attack over as far as the U.S. assessment is concerned?
Certainly this initial wave of an attack is over, which is not to say that there are other waves coming, or that there, is not to say that there are other waves coming. We saw an initial attack earlier today against the state of Israel. Certainly it would be incredibly reckless and would continue to be escalatory were Iran to launch further attacks on Israel, and we'll be monitoring in the hours ahead.
There have been a lot of parallels drawn between Iran's attacks on Israel we saw in April and what happened today. The big difference is that back in the spring, Iran did message for weeks the kind of attack it was going to carry out against Israel, as opposed to this time around. It seemed to be very sudden by comparison. That lack of warning, public messaging, do you read into that? Is there any diplomatic significance?
I don't want to try to make assessments about why Iran made the decisions it made, or why it kind of telegraphed them publicly last time and didn't do so this time. Obviously, we had some indication that an attack might be in the works. You saw us talking about that. We made clear, we gave warnings to our Israeli counterparts about it earlier today, and I think they came and read out some of those conversations publicly. So we had indications that there may be some such attack. I can't speak to why they made the decision to not telegraph it as publicly as they did last time. It doesn't change the fundamental nature of the attacks, which is that this was an unacceptable and brazen action by the state of Iran.
I know you want to have conversations with your Israeli counterparts about what their response will be, but can you say anything about, are the discussions happening now? Have Israeli officials laid out any potential options for retaliation?
There are discussions that are ongoing. There were discussions that were happening between the United States and Israel as the attacks were unfolding. There were discussions that were happening from officials in this building, officials in the White House, and I won't speak to the Pentagon, but I would assume by officials at the Pentagon in the immediate aftermath of the attacks, just in the last couple of hours, and those conversations will continue through the rest of the day and, of course, in the days to come.
Thank you. Matt, did the U.S. have any indication whether or not they were successful that the Iranians intended to strike U.S. interests or assets in the region?
I'm going to defer to the Pentagon to speak to specific operational details as to what the Iranians might have been targeting. They're obviously in the best position to monitor that and to speak to it. And I know they're having a briefing later today. I'll defer that question to them.
Okay. We understand that the embassy had all of its employees go home and shelter in place. Just want to confirm
that was out of an abundance of caution, knowing that an attack on Tel Aviv might be in the works. And so we took that step out of Tel Aviv and potentially Jerusalem as well. So we took that step out of an abundance of caution. But in terms of what specific sites Iran was targeting, I will defer to my colleagues at the Pentagon.
Okay. In terms of the partners that you mentioned were engaged this time, without getting into specifics as to who it was, were there fewer partners? Was there less support for their engagement this time around?
I think that's still a specific. Maybe it's a generality. Either way, I'm just not going to get into it, other than say that there were partners that were engaged with us in this defense of Israel, and I will let every country speak to their own participation.
Okay. It's not a specific. It's just,
it's more specific than I'm willing to share at this point.
And just to clarify, I understand consultations are ongoing with the Israelis. What does the U.S. believe is the right course of action now? A response or diplomacy?
So again, I think it is important that we have those conversations with Israel before we read them out publicly. Obviously, we do not want to see this conflict continue to escalate. That said, we have been clear that there must be consequences for this attack, and I think it's important that we discuss this issue privately with our partners before we read them out publicly.
Okay, and in previous instances, it had become known that that part of the way, as you mentioned, the U.S. deterred Iran from taking action was through diplomacy, including the pushing of the potential of ceasefire talks, a potential breakthrough in Gaza. That seems remote now. What is the status of ceasefire talks, either in Gaza or in Lebanon, that the U.S. had been pushing in the weeks prior to these developments?
It's a really good question, and I will say, I went into some of this detail here yesterday. Where we are on the ceasefire talks in Gaza is that the terrorist group that Iran funds, Hamas, has been unwilling to come to the table to engage the past several weeks. So yes, it's true that we have not been able to advance these ceasefire talks, but it's not because of any lack of effort by the United States or our partners in the region. It's because the terrorist organization that Iran has sponsored for years and years and years has refused to come to the table. So if Iran wants to use the breakdown of ceasefire talks as an excuse for its actions today, it needs to point to the terrorist group that it controls. It's Hamas that has been responsible in recent weeks for the breakdown of those talks.
Is it your understanding that that was one of the reasons that they decided to?
No, I was responding
Okay,
to the question. Yeah.
Last one clarification. I mean, obviously these talks require time, resources. It engages top U.S. officials. Are they still a worthwhile investment of the U.S.'s time when it appears that other parties are not?
No, look, we are not going to give up on reaching a ceasefire in Gaza because we believe it is the best way to free the hostages. It is the best way to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people. It is the best way to ensure long-term peace and stability for the entire region. So no, of course we are going to continue to stay engaged on this. But in any kind of ceasefire talks, when you're talking about two parties to a conflict, you need both parties to engage. And right now we have a refusal to engage by one of those parties.
Sorry, that's Gaza and Lebanon as well, or have you abandoned this?
In Lebanon, so look, we ultimately do want to see a ceasefire. We ultimately want to see a diplomatic resolution. But as I said yesterday, we do support Israel's right to defend itself against terrorist organizations. Hezbollah has continued to launch terrorist attacks across the board, and Israel's taking steps to defend itself against those attacks.
And you mentioned there was, before the attack, that you weren't told by the Iranians that they were going to attack, but you'd had some indication. What was the indication? Was that sort of from satellites able to see things moving around? Are you able to tell us anything more about that?
So I am not able to tell you anymore, unfortunately. Obviously, you've seen all around the world before the outbreak of conflicts that the United States at times has the ability to gather information about what is likely to happen. That was the case here. I just can't say any more about it. But it was not through any conversations with Iran, direct or indirect.
Some small amount of intelligence was declassified so that you could make that warning ahead of time.
I'm not able to get into it any more than what we said publicly already.
In that period between informing the world and the Israelis that of this information, was there any effort to, other than the public statements, to reach out to the Iranians to say, don't do this?
So I will answer that by saying we have made clear for some time that we have the ability to send messages to Iran when it is in our interest to do so. And without speaking to any messages in particular, we have made clear the position of the United States that Iran should not launch this attack, that it would be a mistake for Iran to launch this attack, and I think I'll leave it at that.
And I think the Iranian mission to the UN has talked about, they did send some message, I'm not sure whether it's before, minutes before, after the missiles were launched, or is there anything you can tell us about when that was received and sort of the nature of that message?
It wasn't received because that report's not true. I mean, I have seen the statement from Iran. I saw first stories that they warned us in advance, then I saw stories that they warned us shortly in advance. It's just not true. We received no advance warning from Iran about this attack.
Okay, and since the attack?
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry, I would just note that this is not the first time that Iran has said things about supposed interactions with the U.S. government and messages it has sent to the U.S. government that have not been true. They have done that a number of times over the last few months, and this is one of those examples.
You're saying up till now, up till when you took the podium, I guess, there was no sort of diplomatic note from the Iranians explaining their action?
Correct.
Just to follow up on their statement from in the UN, they said that this attack in response to the violations for their sovereignty and also attacks against their nationals. Now, sovereignty, the attack on Ismail Haniyeh on their territories, do you think this is a legitimate argument for them?
No, of course it's not. If you look at the supposed argument about attacks on their sovereignty, I would say, first of all, that's an event that happened weeks ago, and what's changed in the weeks since then? You've seen the death of the leader of a terrorist organization that Iran sponsors, funds, controls. That's what's changed. And to the extent that any Iranian officials have been killed in the past few days in Lebanon or in Syria, it's because they were meeting with terrorist organizations, meeting with terrorist leaders. And it goes to the point I made a moment ago, which is what you saw Iran to do today was come to the defense of a terrorist organization. I don't think it holds water when you look at all the events of the past few weeks that this event had anything to do with Iran's sovereignty. It has to do with the fact that a number of the terrorist organizations that Iran has set up for years as a way to undermine and attack the state of Israel have been weakened, first over the past few months and then most recently over the past few weeks. It's quite clear that's what they're responding to.
Okay, and one question on Lebanon. I know now everybody is concerned about a wider war, about escalation, but also there are concerns about repercussions in Lebanon. I'm talking about the humanitarian situation, about maybe civil war at some point. So are you talking to the Lebanese? What are your concerns? What are you doing? Are you talking to the LAF? You've been supporting the LAF, and yesterday you were talking about stability and their role in the stability within Lebanon. Who are your partners in Lebanon?
So let me speak to first, you kind of mentioned on the way into the question, the humanitarian situation. We are working to address the humanitarian situation in Lebanon. I would note that the United States has been one of the, if not the largest contributor to humanitarian relief for the Lebanese people going back years, and we will continue to work to provide humanitarian support for the Lebanese people. And we are coordinating with our partners in the region, with international organizations about the shape and nature of those relief efforts, even as we speak. When it comes to the political situation in Lebanon, look, Lebanon has been plagued by instability, as I know you know far better than me, for some time. And certainly not the only, but one of the driving factors of Lebanon's instability has been the fact that Hezbollah plays a significant role in the political organization of Lebanon and has held a veto over Lebanon's ability to move forward with a new president, and has held a veto over the security situation of Lebanese civilians. It's because of Hezbollah's refusal to abide with UN Security Council 1701 and actually pull back from the border, that as they were supposed to do, that we're in this situation today. So I think it's too early, obviously, to say how this conflict will shape out in the next few weeks. But what we are going to be working to do is to try to seize this moment and really hope that the Lebanese people can seize this moment against very difficult odds, because there are still a number of Hezbollah fighters who have access to arms and equipment inside Lebanon, but seize this moment to try to establish actual political stability for Lebanon.
Who do you want to do that?
So look, I'm not...
You're listening to a State Department spokesperson, Matthew Miller, there, reiterating that in accordance with U.S. ironclad commitment to Israel's security, U.S. forces in the region helped Israel defend against Iranian-launched missiles targeting Israel. One of the issues that kept coming up in all of those questions that he was being asked was this news that came out that Reuters was reporting that Iran had notified the U.S. shortly before their attack. Now, a diplomat from the Iranian mission at the UN has told Sky News that no notice was given to the United States prior to their response. However, a serious warning was issued afterwards. And Matthew Miller there confirming that Iran had not informed the United States. In the last few minutes, we've also heard from the Pentagon, and they've said that we were not aware of any warning by Iran ahead of their attack on Israel. Well, let's bring in our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, who is at the United Nations in New York. And Don, we were just hearing there from Matt Miller. We'd heard earlier from Jake Sullivan. But one of the things I was just saying that Matt Miller kept reiterating was this point that they were not aware and hadn't been told by Iran, as had been reported by Reuters ahead of the attack.
Yeah, and that's in marked contrast, of course, isn't it, to what happened in April when Iran launched its first direct attack ever, a barrage of, I think, around 300 rockets, missiles, cruise missiles and drones. But that was after sort of telegraphing the fact it was going to do so fairly publicly in response to an attack on its consulate in Damascus that killed a number of Iranian high-level military commanders that happened on April the 1st. And in the time between that and the response to retaliation by Iran, it made it pretty clear it was going to carry out this attack, allowing, and it was assumed deliberately allowing, Israel and its allies to prepare for that, so that the impact wouldn't be escalatory. Now, that didn't happen today. As you say, we're being told by diplomats here, Iranian diplomats here at the UN, that no more warning was given, but a warning has been given afterwards. And that warning will be in line with what the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, is saying in Tehran, which is a warning to Israel. If you respond to this, if you retaliate to what we've done today, there will be, in the words of their statement, severe blows. And they, in the same statement, said this was carried out to avenge the death of Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah commander, who was the most important Iranian ally in the region until Israel assassinated him. So a clear warning from the Iranians to Israel and its allies, and we've also had clear warnings from the Americans ahead of this attack. And the question, of course, for people like Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, who spoke at the White House ahead of that State Department briefing we've just been listening to, the question for him is, if you did threaten severe consequences, if Iran was to carry out this attack, what will those consequences be? He said that is a fair question, but I'm not going to answer it at this stage. It's too early to say. We're in discussions with our Israeli partners. So that is obviously the question overhanging the region and the escalating conflict there. What does Israel do in response? And if it attacks Iran's nuclear facilities, which Israeli officials had said through at least one highly well-sourced, well-placed American journalist in the New York Times today, they said that if Iran attacks Israel, Israel will go after Iran's nuclear facilities. Whatever action Israel takes in response, will America support it? Certainly supported it and defended it during this extraordinary second direct missile attack carried out by Iran on Israel in the two countries' history. We heard from the Pentagon that at least a dozen interceptor missiles were fired from a naval destroyer, and clearly the Americans were working very closely with the Israelis to defend them from this attack. But what happens next? What does Israel do next? And will America support it if it goes as far as attacking Iranian facilities inside the Iranian borders?
Dom, thank you so much for all of your analysis there from New York, and we will no doubt be speaking in the next half hour. I'll be back at 9 o'clock in about 30 minutes' time on my show, The World. But for now, let's cross over to my colleague, SJ. SJ, over to you.
Yalda, thank you very much. Yalda Hakim there for us this evening in Beirut. As she said, she will be back at 9 o'clock. But for now, we are going to talk about the UK's response to what's been going on in the Middle East tonight. Let's speak to our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, because, Sam, we have heard from Downing Street tonight that the Prime Minister had a call with Benjamin Netanyahu this evening at the same time that this attack started.
That's right, Sarah Jane. Look, there's been a lot of focus inside Whitehall, particularly inside Downing Street, at unfolding events in the Middle East and in Lebanon. And yes, this quite extraordinary fact has just been briefed by Number 10. They have confirmed that as the rockets started to land in Israel, Keir Starmer was on the phone to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, underlining the role that I think Britain is trying to play in the unfolding conflict. Look, I think the big news is that Keir Starmer is going to give an address in about 10 minutes to outline where we are following those 200 rockets that were fired from Iran into Israel. It is an unusual event where a Prime Minister takes to the airwaves at a little after 8:30 at night. That underlines the gravity of the situation. The UK government trying to work out its response. You heard from the Americans a few moments ago, and it's likely that the British will echo the Americans' response, that they are confirming they still think that Israel has the right to defend itself, and that they think that Israel has the right to hit back against the rocket attacks that we have seen today, potentially causing more tit-for-tat escalation in what's going on between Israel and Lebanon in the Middle East. So it will be firstly interesting to see whether Keir Starmer echoes those sentiments from the State Department that we heard in the last 20 minutes. Keir Starmer has been chairing a ministerial meeting today. One of the big focuses I think, for Downing Street and the Foreign Office will be the several thousand British people who have been still left behind in the Lebanon. There has been an instruction for some weeks now that any UK citizens should leave Lebanon because of the escalating conflict. But up to this point, they have been given instructions simply to take normal commercial air flights out of the airport in Beirut. But there's a very real concern inside government that shortly, as this conflict grows, and it sounds from the Americans as if there are yet more stages to come, that the airport in Beirut could become one of the casualties, making it very hard for Brits to go out. That's why the intensity of the warnings has increased. So I suspect that we will hear from Keir Starmer instructions for those remaining Britons who are there. But the main thing, I think, that's going on in London and around the world are just frantic diplomatic efforts to try and stop this getting out of control. Look, there's a tightrope, Sarah Jane, quite clearly, with the Americans saying that Israel has a right to hit back, that this cannot go unpunished. Yet Keir Starmer today, in statements, making clear that he's reiterating the call that he and America and France made at the UN last week for an immediate ceasefire. Quite how you square those two positions at this moment of intense anxiety on the global diplomatic stage as Iran hit back, apparently, as we were hearing, with no notice, despite reports to the contrary, and we saw those missiles through the early evening attempt to land in Israel. No casualties was the word from the Americans from those missiles of any Israelis. One Palestinian, we are told, has been killed. But I think it is the prospect that Iran continues to escalate and that Israel now feels the need to hit back that will be worrying strategists, worrying diplomats in King Charles Street, because the cycle of escalation looks almost inevitably likely to continue at this stage. The question is, what can Keir Starmer say? What role can Britain play at this point in history and at this point in the conflict, just as the Americans and many Middle Eastern partners are frantically trying to de-escalate this conflict, but also what can he say to those Brits remaining behind to give some kind of practical support and practical advice for what they can do if they are caught up in this situation.
OK, Sam, thank you. We are expecting to hear from the Prime Minister within the next 4 or 5 minutes live from Downing Street, so keep it tuned to Sky News for that. We'll bring you the Prime Minister's speech as soon as it gets. I'm going to bring in Miri Eisen, a retired IDF colonel who is in North Tel Aviv this evening. Miri, thank you so much for joining us here on Sky News tonight. I understand that you had to take shelter for around an hour tonight. Talk me through what happened where you are.
So inside my house, and this is my study, you get into your phone. It's an app that the Israeli Homeland Defense put in, and it's actually the new version. Aren't we glad we got to try it out today? I'm a little cynical. But the app said, in a very extraordinary way, right now, go to your safe area. And that's never happened before. And so I'm home with another kid. We go to our safe area, which happens to be a stairwell. And when we're there, sirens come in. Now, the air raid siren both comes into your app on the phone, which knows where you are. You also hear it outside. It's very loud. I know that you put it every once in a while on TV. It's very scary. And that's happening. And as you're showing right now, some of those incoming things, I live in an area of North Tel Aviv where there are both the interceptors, where supposedly it's where the Iranians were aiming at, and then there are the interceptions. Sarah Jane, it's never nice, and I know how hard it must be for people in Lebanon right now. My heart can go out to them, but we just had an attack of 190. I'm going to just say for a moment, they weren't rockets. They were missiles with very heavy payloads, and the interceptors were intercepting them, and you could hear the noise, and then you could hear the debris, and all of this is going on all around. So that's me. What you immediately do in Israel is you text everybody, where are they? My husband was in a vehicle on a main road. That means you stop your vehicle on the side of the road and you lay down flat. That's where he was for 35 minutes. And then you start to check out where everybody is. I think that Israel's air defenses, both the active, the ones that do the intercept, but the passive, the home defense that tell us what to do, that give that early warning, that say to go to safe places, and the fact that we act that way is the really only reason that Israel has so few casualties from Hamas rockets, Hezbollah rockets, let alone from Iranian missiles.
Yeah, Mira, it's really interesting to hear what's going on from your point of view. And as you said, you can identify with the people in Lebanon for what they're going through as well. This is not a good experience for anyone to be under any form of attack. We did hear a briefing from the White House a few moments ago. We're expecting to hear from the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer shortly, so forgive me if I have to interrupt you when he takes the podium to speak. But the White House said that this is a significant escalation by Iran, but the attack appears to have been ineffective. But then we've heard from the IRG, the Iran Revolutionary Guard, this evening. Miri, I will rejoin you in a second. So Keir Starmer is just taken to the podium. Let's hear from the Prime Minister first.
The Iranian regime has launched over 200 ballistic missiles at civilian targets in Israel. It's too soon to assess the impact fully. But I utterly condemn this attempt by the Iranian regime to harm innocent Israelis, to escalate this incredibly dangerous situation and push the region ever closer to the brink. It cannot be tolerated. We stand with Israel and we recognise her right to self-defence in the face of this aggression. Iran must stop these attacks, together with its proxies like Hezbollah. Iran has menaced the Middle East for far too long. Chaos and destruction brought not just to Israel, but to the people they live amongst in Lebanon and beyond. Make no mistake, Britain stands full square against such violence. We support Israel's reasonable demand for the security of its people. I've spoken today to Prime Minister Netanyahu, the King of Jordan, President Macron, and Chancellor Scholz. In the last week, I've also spoken to other leaders, including Prime Minister McCarthy of Lebanon, President Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, to try to find the space for a political solution to the conflicts in Lebanon and Gaza. Because I am deeply concerned that the region is on the brink, and I'm deeply concerned about the risk of miscalculation. The situation in Lebanon is increasingly grave. I want to repeat my advice to British nationals who are still in Lebanon. You must leave now. You should register your presence with government officials on our website. We have a chartered flight, and we're doing everything we can to get people out. But the situation is extremely volatile. So if you have the means to leave, the time is now. Do not wait. I'll now take questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. First of all, is the UK prepared to use British military capabilities to help Israel defend itself against Iran, and has that already happened this evening?
This, as you'll appreciate, is an evolving situation. But what I will say is that we stand with Israel and her right to self-defence, and any relevant updates will be provided in due course.
And on that phone call with Benjamin Netanyahu this evening, you and other world leaders have been calling for a ceasefire, for de-escalation in the region. It doesn't seem that those calls are being heard. Can you give us any more detail on what you said tonight to him?
Well, I won't go into the full details, but in all of the calls I've been making with world leaders, I have expressed my concern that the region is on the brink and there's a high risk of miscalculation, and therefore we have to find a route to de-escalate on all fronts. And in the end, the only solution here is a political solution. So my calls have been about the importance of creating the space and the conditions for that de-escalation and to find that political route forward. With Prime Minister Netanyahu, I also was able to make the case for a ceasefire in Gaza, and importantly, to repeat that the hostages must be released unconditionally and immediately, because we must never lose sight of the hostages who've been held for such a long time now. Thank you.
So what is your message to Israel now? Are you again calling for restraint? Because they would argue that didn't deter a second attack.
Well, my message very clearly tonight is to condemn this attack by Iran, to recognise in clear terms Israel's right to security and to defend herself. And I say that in absolutely clear terms. Obviously, I think all parties are concerned to ensure this doesn't spiral into a much bigger conflict. But on the principle of Israel's right to self-defense, I've been very, very clear. Thank you very much.
The Prime Minister there, his address to Downing Street while he was speaking. The Foreign Secretary has also put out a short statement on social media. David Lammy, I condemn Iran's attack on Israel in the strongest terms. Today, I warned Iran against taking action that could push the region further towards the brink. A cycle of escalation is in no one's interest. A short statement that pretty much sums up what the Prime Minister had to say tonight in Downing Street. Let's bring back in our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, who was listening to that. Sam, the Prime Minister wouldn't be drawn on too much, particularly when faced with a question by our correspondent Liz Bates about whether UK military capabilities were working alongside Israel tonight, as we understood that the US did.
That's right. I think that Keir Starmer wanted to focus on some big picture messages to the nation and to the region, where he wanted to underscore that he stands with Israel, utterly condemning, in his words, the 200 rocket attacks on civilian areas fired from Iran into civilian areas of Israel earlier today. He said that the intent of Iran was to do harm to innocent Israelis and to escalate this incredibly dangerous situation and push the region ever closer to the brink. Now, Keir Starmer made clear that the situation there was so fragile and so uncertain that for British nationals, they must leave now. Please register your presence with the local government officials, with the embassy, with diplomats. He said that they have a chartered flight that people can use, and they're doing everything they can to get people out. But the situation is very volatile. That's what he said. As you say, Sarah Jane, he ducked the question of whether or not British military hardware was involved in the attempts to stop those rockets. It would appear successfully from causing any damage in Israel. However, he also ducked another interesting question. He was pressed by one of the journalists present whether or not Israel effectively has the right now to hit back. Some suggestions from the Americans that this cannot go unpunished. But instead, Keir Starmer emphasised that he believed that Israel had a right to defend itself, but also that there must be that de-escalation must be prioritised. So there wasn't quite the same language, I thought, about the right to hit back. He also said that he had urged Benjamin Netanyahu today to honour a ceasefire that the UK and the US, France and other Western countries have been asking for in Gaza, as well as reiterating the need for hostages to be returned. So a slightly more nuanced statement than the American State Department there from the Prime Minister. But I thought what you saw there was a relatively new Prime Minister seeking to seize a dangerous moment on the world stage, draw together the global diplomatic work that he's been doing over the last week or so. He was in the UN less than a week ago, and both explain to the country what was going on, advise nationals UK nationals who are there to get the government chartered flight, and also to say that his government was on top of this and he would be monitoring events very closely, and urged all sides to de-escalate. So an important moment for Keir Starmer. This effectively is his first big foreign policy challenge, foreign policy crisis, global moment where, in his words, diplomacy and the situation is on the brink. He seems determined to take charge, lead from the front, issue statements from Downing Street and be seen to be the front man for Britain in this perilous moment in the Middle East.
Sam, thank you. Sam Coates there, our Deputy Political Editor, responding to the Prime Minister's statement just a few moments ago. I'm going to return to Miri Eisen, a former retired IDF colonel who joins us now from North Tel Aviv. She was sheltering not too long ago from those ballistic missile attacks from Iran into Israel. Miri, if I may, I'll just get you to respond to Sir Keir Starmer's speech there. You were listening in, and he said he was deeply concerned that the region is on the brink. This attack takes the region further to the brink, and also the risk of miscalculation, because from Israel there will be a response. In fact, the Israeli military saying tonight that it will choose when to prove surprising attack capabilities. What do you think this next step will take us to, Miri?
First of all, I listened to him and I found it very interesting as an Israeli that he came out to make this kind of a very open statement against what for us is such a clear-cut enemy, the Islamic regime of Iran. And I want to say for a moment that that was very heartwarming for me to hear it from afar. When I look at what he was saying and I listened very carefully, I too do not want war. Nobody in Israel wants war. What happened on October 7th is pretty much Israel trying to avoid war for many years in a very bad way. And Hezbollah joining in from October 8th, that was 11 months of Israel trying to allow some kind of diplomacy to make sure that Hezbollah cannot do an October 7th attack. And so when we talk about this escalation in that sense, Israel is trying to go against these different, very negative forces, both in the Middle East, but for me around the world. I don't want a bigger war. I'm very glad that we should avoid it. But I say, Sarah Jane, very carefully and very clearly that avoiding a war, you also have to know that afterwards you can have something like Hezbollah, which has the 10th largest arsenal in the world of rockets and missiles and ATGMs and all the different capabilities, and it's a non-state actor. And then the Prime Minister of England tells all of the Brits to leave Lebanon. I mean, these are very challenging times. So I want the diplomacy, but I do think that actors like the Islamic regime of Iran and like Hezbollah, and sadly like Hamas, do not listen to diplomacy. They see diplomacy as a weakness. And so I want to get there, but I think that we do need to take out some of these military terror capabilities, certainly that Hezbollah has, what Hamas has held. And I don't yet know what Israel will do. I do think that we have capabilities to go against it, but I don't know.
Okay, Miri Eisen, really interesting to talk to you. Thank you so much, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer tonight, saying he feels that countries, including Israel, need to try to find space for a political solution to what's happening in Lebanon and Gaza. The Israel's response to this attack tonight was that the attack was ineffective. However, the Iran Revolutionary Guard also saying tonight that it targeted 3 Israeli military bases, and 90% of their missiles fired into Israel were successful in hitting their targets. But both the White House and Downing Street have said tonight it's too soon to assess the impact of what has unfolded tonight. Let's speak now to Kazra Arabi, Director of Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Research at United Against Nuclear Iran. Thank you for joining us here on Sky News this evening. First of all, your reaction to this clear escalation in the Middle East tonight.
This is a significant escalation, and it's a significant miscalculation by the regime in Iran, by Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. There were no good options for Khamenei and the IRGC. It was a lose situation for the regime, but of all the options on the table, they have picked the worst. An Israeli response, an Israeli retaliation now is inevitable, and they will target military intelligence sites inside of Iran. This is about to get a lot worse, but as I said, the regime in Iran, of all the options available, pick the worst, and it's going to pay the consequences.
Before this escalation, there had been the thought that Israel may well have been holding back because, you know, Iran have been pointing missiles at them, have attacked them before. But now this has happened, it seems that Israel will retaliate, and the idea seems to be that they may target Iran's nuclear weapons program. Is that a real concern, not just for the region, but for the world?
Well, it's certainly an option that Israel has available. And let's be clear, look, what we've just witnessed, what we saw again in April. Look, these attacks appear symbolic, but they are unprecedented in nature. This is a deeply ideological regime. It is a regime that has very, very little support at home. The overwhelming majority of Iranians want to overthrow the Islamic Republic. It is a regime driven by a violent Islamist extremist ideology that is deeply anti-Semitic. It seeks to eradicate the state of Israel. This regime cannot be allowed to have nuclear weapons. It is an existential threat not just for Israel, but also for the Iranian people who have taken to the streets consistently to topple this regime and have been suppressed, have been killed by the very force, by the way, that struck those missiles at Israel today. So the fact that the nuclear sites may be vulnerable to attack, I mean, that's a perfectly legitimate target for Israel, because the Iranian regime, the regime in Iran, cannot be allowed to have nuclear weapons. And today further underscores that.
Kasra Arabi, really appreciate you coming on to react to this evening's developing story and the situation inside Israel. Israel being attacked by ballistic missiles, nearly 200 of them fired from inside Iran tonight. This is very much a fluid situation. We really appreciate your response. Let's speak now to Sami Nader, who is in Beirut tonight, Director of Levant Institute for Strategic Affairs. No, thank you for joining us. Your thoughts on what happens next? As everyone's been keen to point out, this is a fluid situation. The attacks, we're yet to assess what has actually happened inside Israel tonight, but there will be a response. What do you think the next step will be?
This is a very dangerous turning point, because it will mean a full-scale war where we see Iran engaging Israel directly, and this is something all the observers were were fearing, and where all the stakeholders up to now were trying to avoid. However, I think that the Iranian strike was very well calibrated, and it was a message that was delivered to the allies before the foes, if I can put it this way. Namely, it was a message for Iranian allies, namely Hezbollah political base, that after the assassination of Mr. Nasrallah felt abandoned by Iran. It's clear that Iran, since day one, tried to put a distance from sliding into a full-scale war, and to stay at distance from this war of support Hezbollah was waging against Israel. However, after the killing of Nasrallah, if I can put it this way, all the red lines were crossed. And if Iranian did not retaliate, this would have been a major blow, not only to their image, but it would have had a devastating impact
Sami,
on
we only have
several
another 30, 40 seconds together. I just want to ask, Iran saying that these were targeted attacks, they were targeting military bases, amongst other things. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, tonight said that innocent Israelis were amongst the targets. What do you think the truth is at the moment, or is it too early to tell what the targets were?
I think that the targets, it's not that clear what the targets are, but the fact is that Iranian dared for the second time to infringe Israel's sovereignty and to send its missile directly to Israel. And the real question now that they have brought...
We have run out of time together, but we will speak again soon. Thank you.
Tonight, Iranian missiles rained down on Israel, another step towards all-out regional war. Nearly 200 missiles lit up the skies over Israel as residents were told to seek shelter. Iran says the assault is revenge for the assassination of 3 leaders of Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. As Iran struck, another incident underway, 6 people reportedly shot in Tel Aviv in a suspected terror attack. It all happened hours after Israeli troops moved to target Hezbollah inside Lebanon. Iran insists it's ready for any retaliation. Israel says this attack will have consequences. Will this lead to all-out confrontation? That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Hello and welcome to The World and our live and continuous coverage of the events here in the Middle East. I'm Yalda Hakim, live from Beirut. Well, to say the last 2 weeks have been unprecedented is an understatement. Just 2 weeks ago, Israel launched a series of attacks on Hezbollah's top commanders. And of course, at the weekend, we saw Hezbollah's leader targeted and killed. And then we waited to see how Iran would respond. Well, that response came this evening. About 4 o'clock local time here, we heard reports that the United States had informed their counterparts in Israel that Iran was planning on launching a ballistic missile attack imminently as soon as this evening. And then about 3 hours ago, we heard the sirens over Tel Aviv, over Jerusalem. I just want to show you these images that were coming in live to us at the time. Well, I just want you to have a look at this map, which shows just how many siren alerts were issued across Israel. Let's just get that map up. I mean, this map shows the number of areas that were being targeted by Iran. Areas to the west of the city were also targeted, as well as towns and villages further south of the country. Let's just have another listen to those sirens, as well as the missiles that were launched. Quite an extraordinary scene as we saw these missiles raining down across Israel. Well, as you'd expect, Israel says the damage was minimal and that most of the missiles were intercepted, while Iran claims 80% of them hit their targets. And as missiles flew overhead, emergency services say gunmen opened fire in Tel Aviv with 6 people killed. You're looking at these images now of that incident that took place, a completely separate incident, obviously, from the one that we saw with Iran launching those missiles on Israel. So multiple things taking place in Israel this evening, forcing people, millions of people, to get deep into their bunkers, which is what the IDF had informed their citizens, residents of Israel, to do. Let's have a listen to the spokesperson of the IDF, Daniel Hagari, on what he had to say at the time.
Erev Tov.
Good evening. At this point, we do not detect any further threats from Iran in Israel's airspace. You can come out of the sheltered areas, but you must continue to comply with the instructions of the Home Front Command. I would like to ask you to continue to behave responsibly and be alert. During our defense, we had quite a few interceptions. There are a few hits in the center of Israel and in a few places in the southern region. We are still doing a situation estimate. We don't know of anyone who's been injured, and that is thanks to your behavior, to your responsible behavior. And we also ask you not to give information to the enemy and not to pass on any locations and documentations from places that were impacted. We are both on the defensive and on the offensive. We are going to protect the citizens of Israel. There will be implications to these launches, and we will retaliate whenever and wherever we choose to do so.
That was the IDF spokesperson, Rear Admiral Hagari, speaking soon after the sirens stopped, and they issued an alert to citizens, residents across Israel, that they were able to come out of their shelters but remain within the vicinity of their homes, but no need for them to stay in their shelters. Shortly after that, we received news from Iranian state TV claiming, the Revolutionary Guard there claiming that 80% of the missiles had hit their target. Now, as you heard there from Daniel Hagari, the mission had not been successful as far as Israel was concerned because there were no injuries. There were some small injuries, but no deaths. And of course, the United States came out and responded as well. A little earlier, about an hour ago, we heard from the U.S. National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. Let's just have a listen to what he had to say.
We are still working with the IDF and the authorities in Israel to assess the impact of the attack. But at this time, and I stress at this time, we do not know of any deaths in Israel. We are tracking the reported death of a Palestinian civilian in Jericho in the West Bank. We do not know of any damage to aircraft or strategic military assets in Israel. In short, based on what we know at this point, this attack appears to have been defeated and ineffective. This was first and foremost the result of the professionalism of the IDF, but in no small part because of the skilled work of the U.S. military and meticulous joint planning in anticipation of the attack.
Well, you were listening there to National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan responding to the Iranian missiles that rained down on Israel this evening. Just in the last few minutes, we've heard from US President Joe Biden, and he said that the US National Security Team has been in constant contact with their Israeli counterparts, which is what Jake Sullivan confirmed. He's also said the US is actively supporting the defense of Israel. That attack by Iran has appeared to have been ineffective, although Jake Sullivan was saying that the situation is fluid. They are monitoring the situation and they are going to see what the next steps are. Well, let's go straight to our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle. And Ali, you were actually in Tel Aviv. We often see you in Jerusalem, but you were in Tel Aviv tonight following what was believed to be a terrorist attack in Tel Aviv. But then, of course, the warnings that were issued that we were going to see this attack from Iran, and suddenly you found yourself in the streets of Tel Aviv, and I heard and saw those ambulances going past you and the sirens blaring.
Yeah, and we'd only just arrived actually from Israel's northern border with Lebanon, where of course there is still an Israeli ground incursion going on into Lebanon. So, you know, in and of itself, that demonstrates at least three major fronts that Israel has had to deal with today alone. It's been going into Lebanon to find Hezbollah positions. It was then the subject of a terror attack in Tel Aviv, well, in Jaffa, just on the edge of Tel Aviv, 6 people killed, 9 people wounded. And then really, I mean, an hour or so later, nothing more than that, the missiles started coming in. And we were just on the outskirts of Tel Aviv, and like many others, pulled to the side of the road, got out to see what was going on. People were taking shelter. There wasn't, much warning. This had come somewhat out of the blue. In the past, in April, when Iran had attacked Israel, you felt that there was a lead up to it. And that time was different. I described the attack when I saw it coming in as being larger than in April. Now, I think in just pure numerical numbers, the IDF says somewhere around 200 missiles were fired at Israel tonight. Back in April, it was in excess of 300. But the difference this time was there was no warning. Senior officials around the Middle East had told me that back in April they'd been given a few days warning that it was going to happen, and so people could kind of get sorted. You got that coalition of the Americans, the Brits, the French, and some of the Arab states as well in defense of Israel. That wasn't really the case this time. The Americans did shoot some of the missiles down, but it was far more reactive rather than prepared. And back in April, Iran sent first drones, then cruise missiles, and then ballistic missiles. So it was staggered, and Israel could see it coming because the drones fly so much slower. Again, they could get prepared. None of that happened this time. The news first came out at about mid-afternoon that Iran was planning an imminent attack. The guidelines, the Home Command guidelines, changed across the country, and then only a couple of hours later, all of our phones started buzzing with a new warning system that the Israelis have got in place that goes over the cellular network, and seconds after that the siren sounded, and then, you know, it is no exaggeration to say that the skies above us were alight with missiles coming in and interceptor missiles heading up to try and collide with them.
Ali, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there. A dramatic night there in Israel with millions forced into bunkers. Thanks so much for bringing us up to date. Well, let's speak now to Ambassador Danny Danon, Israel's ambassador to the UN. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. It was another very difficult night for Israel. Of course, we saw a similar attack in April, but this felt like there was less notice, and we could see it in the night sky raining over Israel.
Indeed, Yalda, it was an unprecedented attack against Israel. And you know, for years, the Iranians were playing the game, hiding behind their proxies, but now all masks are off. You know, they send hundreds of ballistic missiles into civilian population. They are not hiding their intentions. And I can tell you one thing, we will retaliate. It will be painful. We will not sit idly by when a state is attacking, a terror state like Iran is attacking our civilians.
Ambassador, do you think, it's clear that you're going to retaliate? The United States says that there is going to be consequences. But in April, you retaliated as well. Are you saying that this one's going to be bigger?
Well, we cannot get accustomed to the situation where Iran is sending hundreds of ballistic missiles into our country. You know, even when you look at the history, at the Blitz of London, you haven't seen the number of missiles flying into a capital city or a state. So we have to take different measures. As we speak, the cabinet is discussing those issues, and I'm sure that it will be felt very soon. At the same time, I have called the Security Council to convene an emergency session here at the United Nations to condemn the aggression of Iran.
In terms of Iran launching this kind of attack, and the United States says it is an escalation, they are saying that they are doing it in response to the events of the last few weeks, which has been unprecedented. The killing of Hassan Nasrallah, a key proxy of Iran. Israel was aware that something like this would potentially come.
Well, that's a linkage that one can not understand. I cannot understand. You know, we attacked a terrorist leader in Beirut, and all of a sudden Iran is feeling that the guardian of terrorists all around the world. And attacking a state with rockets and missiles, that's a line no country can cross. I think the leaders of Iran know exactly what they are doing. It's unfortunate for the people of Iran. I know that the majority of them are peaceful, but the regime is a hostile regime, and we see that today they crossed the line by attacking us directly and not through the proxies.
Ambassador, we received reports from the Israeli military this evening that they would continue launching powerful strikes across the Middle East. What does that mean? Because I've been here in Beirut, in Lebanon, for the last few weeks, and we've been seeing the bombardment take place. We've seen the impact on the civilians. The death toll is now well over 1,000. 1 million people have been displaced in this country. But when that statement says we are launching attacks across the Middle East, does that mean well beyond Lebanon tonight?
No, I think it's very clear. No terrorist can hide. And every terrorist should know that we will find them. We have the technology, we have the capabilities, they cannot hide. We will find them. And I think the attack showed that Iran actually panicked. They felt that they're losing control over parts of Lebanon, that Hezbollah is losing support in Lebanon. And I think that's one of the reasons they decided to take the hit and bring it back to their home country.
Ambassador, I'm just going to have to interrupt you because President Biden is currently speaking, so I'm going to go to him. But thank you so much for your time on the program. Let's go straight to President Biden, who is making a statement at the moment.
Okay. Before I began, I wanted to say a few words about Iran's missile attack on Israel today. At my direction, the United States military actively supported the defense of Israel, and we're still assessing the impact. But based on what we know now, the attack appears to have been defeated and ineffective. And this is testament to Israeli military capability and U.S. military. It's also a testament to intensive planning between the United States and Israel to anticipate and defend against the brazen attack we expected. Make no mistake, the United States is fully supportive of Israel. And I've spent the morning and part of the afternoon in the Situation Room and meeting with my whole national security team and consulting with the Israelis indirectly because, in terms of their impact on us. And the national security team has been, as I said, in constant contact with Israeli officials and their counterparts, and is going to continue to be brought to me throughout the day. We're still out to share updates when we get them, and we will do that. And now I want to turn to what we're going to be talking about today, the damage done by this horrible hurricane. My top priority, and I mean this sincerely because we've been through a lot of these, my top priority is to ensure the communities devastated by this hurricane get the help and support they need as quickly as possible. As quickly as possible. As we watch the storm from the Gulf region form, I also directed FEMA to redeploy a substantial number of assets and resources to ensure we're ready to deal with what we expected and to support all the folks in need. We had over 1,000 federal personnel, including search and rescue teams, at the ready on the ground before it hit. Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama became the staging ground for responders throughout the entire region.
On Israel, and he said that the U.S. actively supported the defense of Israel following that attack by Iran, and he had earlier put out a statement saying that the attack appears to have been ineffective. The Israelis, as well as the Americans, are saying that as far as they're concerned, they don't believe that anyone has been killed, although there have been some minor injuries. They also said it is a fluid situation. Let's go straight to the UN in New York and speak to our Dominic Waghorn, who is monitoring all of the developments coming out of the United States. And Dom, for the last hour or so, we have been getting a lot of reports coming out from the State Department's given a press conference. Obviously, the president's been speaking. The Pentagon has issued a statement. The United States making it very clear tonight that they stand with Israel.
Yeah, and we're hearing those two words, aren't we? Defeated and ineffective. We've heard that from the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, from the State Department and the Pentagon. That's the script they're all reading from, and that's what the president said there as well. And the message really is that even though Iran fired hundreds of ballistic missiles at Israel, they haven't, it seemed, done much damage, and they've only killed possibly one person who, ironically and tragically for his family, is an Arab in Jericho. Well, that's certainly the reports that the Americans say they're investigating. I'm not sure if there's been an update to that since Jake Sullivan broke that news. But their message to the Israelis will be that we are foursquare behind you. We are supporting you. We were at your side when this attack happened. And the Pentagon said that at least 12 interceptor missiles were fired from a US naval destroyer as part of the shield that protected Israel. Israel, of course, using the American-supplied air defense systems that they have to such success in repelling this attack. But I think, obviously, also the Americans will be saying to them, they haven't done much damage, let's call it a day, can we move on? And that message of de-escalation will be reinforced, and it will be reinforced again, not just from America, but also from other countries. At the UN Security Council meeting, it's just been announced that they will hold another emergency meeting about the situation at 10 o'clock New York time tomorrow. I think, Yalda, it was also very interesting what Danny Danon said to you as well a little while ago, just now. And of course, the Americans have always said that self-defense is a fundamental right the Israelis have, and with Ukraine, it is up to them how they exercise that. And I think there will be pressure on the Israelis not to retaliate in force. But when you asked Danny Danon, will it be similar to what we saw in April when, in response to the first direct attack on Israel carried out by Iran in both countries' history, Israel responded in a fairly token way. He said we can't get into a situation where the Iranians are kind of routinely firing ballistic missiles in Israel. And in the wake of that retaliation in April, there was, as you remember, we were both there together, a real sort of backlash politically, not just from the right, but across the spectrum, saying it was a rather limp response and it will only embolden Iran to do the same. And I think those critics will say the same of the Netanyahu government. You can't let this happen twice now. It will have to be responded to in a way that is punitive. You'll have to follow through on your threat to carry out severe consequences if Iran attacks, as it has done, and there will be pressure on the Netanyahu government to respond with considerable force. And the question then, of course, is how much America supports it. And if, as has been mooted today in some well-connected reports from well-connected American journalists, well-connected with the Israelis follow through on the threat they have privately made, or they've made through back channels to Iran, that they will go after Iran's nuclear weapons or alleged nuclear weapons facilities. What does America do then? So there'll be pressure on Israel to show restraint, but I think it's hard to imagine the Israelis not striking back with some kind of force now in response to this second direct attack by Iran on Israel.
Indeed, that's what we continue to hear from both the Israeli side and the Americans. And President Biden has said he is talking to the Israelis, as is his national security team, about what the response should be next. Dom, thank you very much for joining us there from New York. Well, as we've been reporting, given the scale of these missiles, people were told to seek shelter. And of course, millions across Israel did. Well, let's speak now to Dever Cohen, who is a resident in Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Dever, for joining us here on the program. Just tell us a little bit about those moments when we heard those missiles being launched and they were being intercepted. It was unclear exactly what was happening. But of course, the IDF was issuing statements telling people to seek shelter, go into their bunkers and not come out until they informed them to do so.
Right, so thank you, Yelda, for having me. I really hope you guys had a nice evening, because we had our worst. We have a sweet 4-month-old baby girl. When the Iran attack started, we didn't think twice. We just took her and ran to find safety. As we were running, we heard siren from another terrorist attack in Jaffa, Tel Aviv. Unfortunately, they killed 6 of our sisters and brothers. Imagine holding your baby, as you see in the picture, trying to protect her, while danger surrounds you, and you don't know who is gonna come, bomb or terrorist. Just think about it. No parents should ever have to feel that. In just 1 year, Yelda, we've been through too much. In the middle of our most important holiday, Hamas commit the worst attack against us, and still our brothers and sisters there. We faced daily bombing from Hezbollah and huge-scale attacks from Iran that you talked about. Yet people still question our rights to defend ourselves. How many more attacks must we face before we can finally say enough? No one should ever have to ask for permission to protect their home and loved ones.
Dever, you talked there about your baby, your family, your concerns. Are you worried that this is going to escalate into something wider?
That's a good question, and I'm not a IDF speak person. I really don't know what's gonna be or what's gonna happen, but I hear to say that you can look at the picture. That's not supposed to happen. It's crazy, and you don't know. You can see. You already know. There's a lot of places in Israel that face just right now with terrorists, with bombs, and with all kind of attacks.
Dever Cohen, thank you very much. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. And I hope everything's going to be okay, and we'll be at peace. Good evening. Thank you, guys.
Cohen, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. There's a resident there of Tel Aviv, and you get the sense of how anxious people are feeling in Israel. Here in Lebanon, people are extremely concerned about the situation escalating right across the region. And as we've been reporting this is the second time this year that this shadow war between Israel and Iran has burst into the open. Let's get the very latest from our defense and security editor, Deborah Haynes. She's been charting the rivalry and assessing what this could all mean for the region.
Israel will have known this was coming after attacking Iran's allies and interests. Waves of Iranian missiles, many of them blasted out the sky by Israeli air defences. The government here says there will be consequences. Unclear yet how far they will go. The spiralling crisis was triggered on the 7th of October last year when Hamas in Gaza launched a deadly assault into Israel. A day later, Hezbollah started firing rockets into the north of the country. Over the year, there have also been attempts by Iranian-backed militants in Iraq to hit Israel, as well as threats from Syria, even from Houthi militants in Yemen, more than 1,000 miles away. With their defences painfully compromised, the Israeli military initially focused on Hamas in Gaza with a major land and air operation. It meant there was limited capacity to strike back against Hezbollah in Lebanon, even though some 60,000 Israeli civilians were forced to evacuate their homes in the north. Over time, Israel's readiness and ability to use force more widely has grown, with strikes into Syria and also against Houthi targets in Yemen. The most significant fight back started last month inside Lebanon, with a series of escalating attacks against Hezbollah, including the killing of its leader. The Israeli government appears to be trying to shift the balance of power in the region by targeting Iranian proxies in a huge challenge for Tehran. The regime seems to have badly miscalculated the risk that Israel is willing to take, even if it means triggering all-out war. These strikes by Iran an attempt to deter more Israeli attacks. But the momentum right now is with Israel, and there's no sign of it slowing down. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Northern Israel.
Well, Iran earlier said that they launched this attack with the blessing of and on the orders of the supreme leader, and of course to avenge the killing of the leader of Hezbollah as well as the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh. And of course this attack comes after Israel launched that ground offensive just yesterday in southern Lebanon. Well, Israeli defense forces had been directing people south of the Litani River to evacuate. They then extended that zone to the Awali River, around 40 miles from the border. The IDF has also imposed a closed military zone along 3 communities near its northern border. They also released footage showing strikes in southern Lebanon at these locations. Just have a look. Well, Sky News is unable to independently verify when this footage was actually filmed. Let's go straight now to our special correspondent, Alex Crawford, who is in southern Lebanon for us. Alex, I saw you leave this morning as things developed overnight, and we saw Israel plan to launch that incursion. Just tell us, it's been a dramatic night of Iran launching missiles on Israel, but of course, this ground operation by Israel also continues.
Yeah, and I don't think it's too much of a coincidence that on the same day that Israel announced it was doing this ground invasion, it's being seen very much as a ground invasion by people in Lebanon, including those Hezbollah supporters, but also ordinary Lebanese people and the Lebanese government. I don't think it's a coincidence that at the start of the day we heard about the Israeli troops moving inside Lebanon, and by the end of the day Iran was attacking Israel and linking it to its actions in or against Hezbollah and inside Lebanon. There's no doubt that Hezbollah has taken an absolute hit over the last 2 weeks, quite an extraordinary sequence of events. In just 2 weeks, they've had the booby trap, pager and radio explosions, a lot of their senior commanders hit, assassinations in and attacks in the center of Beirut as well as in the suburbs of Beirut, and culminating in taking out their leader, a close friend of the Iranian leadership. So they have really been knocked back and caught in the crossfire. There have been tens of thousands of people, civilians killed, mothers, children killed, lots of injuries, and a huge displacement problem, the biggest in Lebanon's history. About 1 million people on the run looking for shelter, and we've been just hearing more explosions coming here in the south of Lebanon just in the last few minutes before we came to air. So civilians are in the crossfire, and there's no doubt that somehow this could possibly be connected. Have a look at what we found out today.
South Lebanon is being pounded by Israeli forces from the air. These pictures provided by the Israeli military show hit after hit after hit, apparently targeting Hezbollah tunnels and infrastructure, and some attacks are clearly in villages and communities. In other pictures filmed by independent media, what looks like white phosphorus is being used, a chemical substance banned in residential areas under international law and which the Lebanese government has repeatedly criticized. The southern city of Tyre has turned into a virtual ghost town, empty streets and shuttered shops, with many people either fleeing the city altogether or staying inside their homes. Only in part of the old town do we find some small groups, residents who refuse to be forced out of their homes and livelihoods. Like Elias Barber, whose business building small boats has been in the family for generations.
No matter what they do, we won't leave. This is my business. Everything we have is here, and we're not going to leave it.
People are scared, but won't budge. Leaving here would be like ripping my heart out of my body, this woman told me. In the southern village of Ain el-Delab, they buried 13 of their friends and relatives, the second day of mass funerals. Mothers and 2 children are among those they said goodbye to this time. The villagers are in shock after the worst tragedy to hit their community in decades. 45 of them were killed in the most deadly single Israeli strike in nearly a year.
They're still conducting mass funerals for those who were killed in the lead-up to this point, and now with the ground invasion, they're very much fearing that there's going to be a lot more of these in the days and weeks to come.
The community is devastated.
Everyone just wants this to stop, to end. It's our land, it's our land, it's our home, it's our people. We just want to live in peace. That's what we want. That's it. They should not attack any kilometer of our land. It's ours.
Noor, too, can't believe what's happening. What have these innocent people done, she says? Why are they doing this to us? They're killing whole families. She goes on, this is like Gaza too, and the whole world is watching. A short distance away, another fresh Israeli attack hours earlier. This time a Fatah leader was on the Israeli kill list in Lebanon's largest Palestinian refugee camp. He survived, but 6 others didn't, including 3 children, according to the Lebanese state news agency. They're armed here and keen to show they're ready to fight, with Israel saying its special forces are carrying out operations inside the country that gave them sanctuary. The Israeli military has left a trail of devastation in the southern suburbs of the Lebanese capital, and to many these scenes are horribly reminiscent of those in Gaza, which the Hezbollah militant group has always insisted its attacks on Israel are linked to. But there are families mourning across Lebanon, many totally unconnected with the militant group. They're bereft, but also furious at what they see as Israel's violation of the country's sovereignty and the powerlessness of the international community to stop it.
Alex, I just wanted to pick up on some of the things that were raised in your report, including, Israel has said that these operations will be limited in scope and geography. They've reassured the United States that they will ensure that this is short, sharp and fast. But there must be growing concern in southern Lebanon tonight that this could escalate. The Israelis have found themselves in this position before in 1982, and there must be concern that this could turn into a much bigger conflict.
I mean, they're a peak concern, really, because over the past few weeks and indeed months, many people, many Lebanese government ministers have learned that not an awful lot of what Israel says, Israel sticks to. They believe that certainly a number of government ministers have said that they thought they had a deal. They thought they had managed to convince Hezbollah to agree to a ceasefire just before the Israeli Prime Minister flew to New York. And they believed that Benjamin Netanyahu had also agreed to that ceasefire. And judging by the briefings from the US State Department at that time, around about the same time, they also believed it. And yet that set off a chain of events, including the assassination of the Hezbollah leader, which has led to this point as well. They have managed to rein in, the government ministers have managed to rein in Hezbollah up until now. And now there'll be a lot of diplomatic goings on behind the scenes to try and keep Iran and Israel reined in. But neither Iran or Israel appear to be ready to stop battling against each other. So the signs do not look good at all right now.
Alex, thank you so much for all of your reporting there. That was our Alex Crawford reporting from southern Lebanon. We've just got some breaking news that's come in the last few minutes. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has said that Iran made a big mistake tonight and they will pay. So very much what we've been hearing from other Israeli officials as well, that there will be consequences as a result of the missiles that Iran launched on Israel this evening, believed to be almost 200 ballistic missiles that obviously Israel's defenses intercepted. He also has said what other Israeli officials, including the IDF, have said, that the Iranian missile attack on Israel failed. And he said the regime in Iran does not understand our determination to defend ourselves and our determination to retaliate against our enemies. Well, we just actually have Danny Danon, Israel's ambassador to the UN, speaking live at the moment. Let's just have a little listen into what he has to say.
And unfortunately, today the leadership of the Palestinian Authority are not capable of proving themselves as partner for peace. You know, they haven't condemned Hamas. President Abbas spoke in the General Assembly for half an hour, ignored the atrocities and Hamas completely. He never mentioned Hamas. So I think once there will be a genuine leader among the Palestinians who is serious and sincere about his intentions, he will find the Israelis sitting there willing to negotiate peace. Unfortunately, it is not the case today. Thank you very much.
Okay. You're listening there to Ambassador Danny Danon making a statement at the United Nations. Well, let's go to Israel now and speak to Zohar Palti, the former director of intelligence at Mossad. Thank you very much, Zohar, for joining us here on the program. You and I spoke when Iran launched missiles on Israel in April, and you at the time said everything is on the table. Tonight we're hearing from the Israeli Prime Minister, who has said that Iran has made a big mistake doing this. Is everything again now on the table?
The issue is not when Israel is said everything is on the table. The issue is right now that Iran almost declared a war on the states of Israel. I mean, just above my hometown, there have been like 35 ballistic missiles for the range of almost 2,000 kilometers all over Tel Aviv area, very crowded area, populations, free country. Out of the blue, the Iranians decided to attack us. And it seems to me that there is a consequences for that. And the Iranians will have to figure out how to deal with this issue. And what Prime Minister Netanyahu just said, that if somebody is attacking us, it seems to me that the right thing is to anticipate that there will be a retaliation for that.
Would you say that the retaliation will be different to the one we saw in April?
First of all, I don't know. And secondly, the answer is yes, probably, because it was very, let's say, limited one. We hold our horses back in April. And since then, what we saw is we saw that for 11 months, we used to almost do